So thank you very much for coming back to the afternoon session. And the first speaker is Lincoln Cannon. Lincoln, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Julia. Can everyone hear me all right? Good. Like others today, I'm going to call your attention to the subject of our dead. The founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, gave a sermon on that same subject a few months before he was killed, and he dedicated that sermon to his dead friend, King Follett. Today I'm going to share with you an interpretive variation on that sermon in memory of my father, Lane Cannon. He was among the inventors of the word processor, an early engineer of software that became WordPerfect, and eventually was the vice president of engineering for the business of that same name. November 27th of this year would have been his 61st birthday, but he was consumed by repeated cancers and died 13 years ago at age 48. Most, if not all of you, have also lost friends, so I feel to speak on the subject of our dead generally and offer you my ideas for consolation. I ask sincerely for your hope and trust that I may speak truth, particularly of the sort that carries conviction to hearts and minds of its trustworthiness. Truth of the sort we should create to the extent we don't discover it, so that even if you happen to think it's not true yet, you'll forgive me for thinking it is, and join me in the work to make it so. Trust at least that my voice could be true. Relax inclinations to skepticism and let hope inspire a strenuous mood. That is powerful in a prayer. There's strength here, and I'm confident our prayer will matter. Before I enter fully into the subject of our dead, I'll provide some context. I wish to go back to when gods, without beginning, find themselves making worlds without end. There's the starting point for us to look to. To understand the subject of our dead, we must start with an understanding of God. If we start right, it's easier to go right. But if we start wrong, we may go wrong and it would be hard to get right. There are few in our world who understand rightly the nature of God. The great majority of humans comprehend little about their relationship to God. So they know little more than the beast, little more than to eat, drink, sleep. That's all humanity knows without inspiration. And I mean that by definition, not hypothetically. The beast eats, drinks, sleeps, and knows nothing more about God. Yet it knows as much as we, except to the extent we comprehend God. If humans don't comprehend God, they don't comprehend themselves. I want to go back to when gods, without beginning, find themselves making worlds without end, and so lift our minds to a more lofty sphere and a more exalted understanding than what the human mind generally aspires to. I want to ask this group, each of you, to answer this question in your own heart. What kind of being is God? Put aside creeds and dogmas, ask yourself, turn your thought into your own heart, and ask if you've seen, heard, or communed with God. I repeat the question, what kind of being is God? Do you know? Have you seen, heard, or communed with God? Going forward, the question will perhaps occupy your attention more than before. If any of us can explain or convey an understanding of God so that the aesthetic seals itself in our hearts, then we should never again speak or act against prophets. But if all fail, we should renounce any pretension to inspiration or inheritance of revelation, and welcome each other as reformed sinners or crackpots, hailed as friends, no longer offenders of the religious, nor fools to the irreligious. In any case, if we're all honest enough to renounce our pretensions when our ignorance is shown, we'd all be as bad as each other. We might as well shun or ridicule you as me. And if that's justified, where would be the end? Who wouldn't suffer? But we shouldn't oppress others for their religion, if it doesn't call for oppressing us. Everyone should have the right to be a false prophet or a true one. Indeed, as Moses says in the Bible, I wish that all were prophets. In that spirit, we're going to inquire after God, to know and be familiar with God. And if we succeed, then we'll also know something about prophecy. So let's go back to when gods, without beginning, find themselves making worlds without end. to show the kind of being God is. What sort of being was God? I wish the world could hear it. God was once as we are now, and is a post-human. That's the great secret. If time and space opened to reveal the God whose power created our world and innumerable others, if we were to see God here and now, we would see post-humanity. Pre-humanity evolved within the contours of its environment. Humanity projected itself on that environment, and post-humanity realized that projection. The gods created worlds in their own image, watched those things that they had ordered until they obeyed, and thus created humanity in their own image. In order to understand the subject of our dead, for consolation of those who mourn the loss of friends, we must understand how God came to be. I'm going to tell you how God came to be God. We've imagined and supposed that God was God forever. I reject that idea, and so should you. God was once like us. God, our Creator, yes, lived in a world like ours. These are incomprehensible ideas to some, but they're simple. The first principle of the gospel of Christ is to trust in God, and not just any God, but rather the God that was once like us. That's Jesus' good news. And I wish I could tell it to the fundamentalists like an archangel from the apocalypse, so their dogmatizing would cease forever. What does Jesus say? The Son can do only what he sees his Father doing. As the Father has life in himself, so has he granted the Son to have life in himself. What does Jesus do? He lays down his life, and he takes it up again. Only what he sees his Father doing. Do the fundamentalists believe it? If they don't, then they don't believe the Bible. Now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God. And we've got to learn how to be gods ourselves, the same as all gods have done before us, by going from one small degree to another, and from a small capacity to a great one, from compassion to compassion, from creation to creation, until we can resurrect our dead and are able to live in everlasting love and light as do those who live in everlasting power. And in these times of accelerating change, this proposition is serious. These are the first principles of consolation. How consoling to mourners when they must part with a friend, to know that although their bodies go down and dissolve, they shall rise again to live in everlasting love and light. As the Bible says, we will be heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. What is that? To gain the same love, the same light, the same power, until we become God, the same as those who have gone before, not merely as their prosthetics, but rather as genuinely compassionate creators in ourselves. The Bible tells of two persons aspiring to godhood. One will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. In contrast, Jesus, being in the very nature a God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, Jesus says to his Father, I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your presence. Jesus exemplifies godhood not egotistically, but rather altruistically, in cooperation with his Father, so that they would be glorified together. Likewise, Jesus says to his disciples, I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything, and I will do it. If you love me, keep my commands. So Jesus further exemplifies and invites us to cooperative altruism. Love post-humanity with all your heart and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love humanity as yourself, not as being human, but rather as becoming post-human. Trust in and change toward post-humanity. These are the first principles of the gospel of Christ, about which so much has been said. When we climb up a ladder, we must begin at the bottom and ascend step by step until we arrive at the top. And so it is with these principles. We must learn the first before learning others. Even as we change, transfigured, or resurrected to post-humanity, we will continue to learn. For now, we don't even have the anatomical or environmental capacity to comprehend our Creator. I suppose I shouldn't speculate excessively beyond what experience and logic warrant. If I do, rationality itself will cry treason and start ridiculing me. So I'll turn to old-fashioned logic for a while. I'll comment on the simulation argument. I want to analyze it. As the philosopher wrote it, at least one of the following propositions is true. 1. The human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. 2. Any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history or variations thereof. 3. We are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. It follows that the belief that there is a significant chance that we will one day become post-humans who run ancestor simulation is false, unless we are currently living in a simulation. The argument can be generalized to all feasible creation mechanisms, whether they be computation, terraforming, or cosmoforming, or even resurrection itself, which from the inside could be indistinguishable from the others. If you disagree with logic. Logicians can do no more than I'm telling you. Thus it follows that belief will one day become post-humans who create worlds or resurrect the dead is false, unless we are currently living in a created world. I want the atheist transhumanists that ridicule religion to understand, so I'll simplify. We almost certainly will not be the only or first to create worlds like those in our past. Without beginning, gods find themselves making worlds without end. Some suppose contemporary science and technological trends will make us the first gods, but they're wrong. The logicians say if you trust in anything not warranted by experience and logic, we'll cry treason. Yet how can we escape extinction except God be with us? Reason binds us. As we've looked at the world, we've found life everywhere. Yet as we look at the heavens, not recognizing post-humanity, we are tempted to despair. If humans are probable, then we are destined for extinction. That is the conclusion warranted by experience. And that is the conclusion warranted by logic, unless post-humanity already exists. I'm grateful for logic, but I'm also grateful for that sublime aesthetic in our hearts, which encourages our will to post-humanity. Logicians, reason with me. If God does not exist, we will not become God. Without beginning, gods find themselves making worlds without end. When we start this way, we start to learn about the living God, transcendent and immanent, what we should worship, and how we should worship. We approach godhood, and we ask not just any way, but rather we ask so as to receive answers, both with our voices and with our actions. The heavens unfold to us, and nothing is withheld. Whether there be one God or many gods, they are discovered and created. If there are bounds to the worlds, they are discovered and created. When we are ready to come to God, God is ready to come to us. Now, why do so many of the religious say that God created the world out of nothing? The reasons are creeds and dogmas, which make it blasphemy to contradict their idea. If you tell them that God made the world out of something, they'll call you a fool. But we've learned to know more, and the sublime aesthetic in us would do more. So I'll associate myself with that. You ask the religious why they say the world is created out of nothing, and many will answer, doesn't the Bible say God created the world? And they infer from the word create that it must have been made out of nothing. Now, the word create came from a Hebrew word that does not mean to create out of nothing. Rather, it means something like organize or shape, as we would organize materials to shape a ship. Hence, the Bible suggests God had materials to organize the world out of chaos, chaotic matter and energy. Matter existed from the time God existed. Matter can never be destroyed. It may be organized and reorganized, but not destroyed. It had no beginning and can have no end. I'll mention another subject, which is calculated to exalt humanity. But I can't say much about it. I'll just touch on it because time won't permit more. It's associated with the subject of the resurrection of our dead. The soul, the spirit, or the mind. Where did it come from? Most theologians say that God created us from nothing, but we shouldn't believe it. The idea lessens humanity. I'm going to tell of things more noble. We say that God has always existed. Who told us so? How did it get into our heads? Who told us that humanity didn't always exist? Well, humanity has always existed in potential and pattern. God created our world and our bodies from cascading causes. How does it read in the Bible? It doesn't say God created us from nothing. It says God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils breath of life, and the man became a living being. Humanity in the broadest sense has always existed with God. So when we mourn, what have we lost? Our friends are only separated from their bodies for a little moment, as it were, and they still exist in cascading effects on our relations and our minds, the same as we do, although temporarily less empowered than we are. This is the immortal aspect of humanity. Is it logical to say that our minds are immortal, and yet that they had a beginning? That which has a beginning may also have an end. Although we change, we had no beginning. Neither will we have an end. There never was a time when we did not exist in causes, nor will there ever be a time when we will not exist in effects. Unique in time and space, and yet thoroughly and pervasively interconnected, we have always existed and always will exist with God. All the theologians from the beginning of history who say that the human mind had a beginning prove that it must have an end. And if that's true, then we'll eventually go extinct. But if I'm right, God never had the power to create humanity from nothing. God could not create God from nothing. In the broadest sense, we have always existed, information forever, and there's no creation about it, although we'll change. Aspects of humanity always exist with God. Without beginning, gods find themselves in the midst of chaos and potential. And because gods are more intelligent, they make worlds without end, whereby the rest can advance. Gods make others more intelligent, that all may increase in light and love, knowledge and power, through and for each other. These are good principles. They taste good. I can taste good principles, and so can you. You say honey is sweet, and so do I. When we receive good principles, we know they're good. In life, we experience everything precisely as though we had no bodies at all. And anything we learn that will preserve our minds will also preserve our bodies. So we have a responsibility, an awful responsibility, in relation to our dead. What of all who didn't learn to preserve their minds while alive? Can we do nothing for our friends who died without an opportunity to prepare? Can they be saved, although their bodies are decaying in the graves? Our greatest responsibility in this world is to seek after our dead. We can't be whole without them. They can't be whole without us, and thus our obligation. We should trust in the possibility of resurrecting our dead, according to the foretellings of the prophets. As the Bible says, turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the hearts of the children to their parents. Imagine a post-human genealogist. Using the tools of quantum archaeology, she traces backwards through time and space, from effects to causes. Sampling a sufficiently large portion of her present, she attains a desired probabilistic precision for a portion of her past, and she generates you. The future you is distinguishable from the present you, but no more so than the today you is distinguishable from the yesterday you. You are resurrected, and you learn to repeat the process for your friends. As mourners, we have occasion to rejoice. My father, Lane Cannon, is gone only until the resurrection of our dead, to rise and reunite with my family and his friends in love and in light. We all have parents, siblings, children, and friends who have gone, but they are only absent for a moment. They persist in effects, and we'll meet them again when we or our descendants become God. We will raise our dead, so we may become God together. I trust this, and so should you. Although we should take risks seriously, the sublime aesthetic moves us against fear and to action. Although we may mourn or weep, we expect our friends. And more, we actively invite our friends to rise with us in the morning of the resurrection. Are there any questions?
Something that you can do to read the question, you click on the question and it should stay there instead of moving on the screen.
Oh, thank you. All right. So the first
I hope
question
it
I
could.
see, in your God hypothesis and in your position of this God, does God punish, and could he punish eternally? So first question there, I won't speak for everyone who trusts in God, but the God that I trust in isn't concerned with punishing arbitrarily. Let's see, could God be completely unassociated with the Jesus hypothesis? Yes, I think there's lots of God hypotheses that can be unassociated with the Jesus hypotheses, although I think that narrow understandings of the Jesus hypothesis are not nearly as useful as broad understandings of the Jesus hypothesis, and that those broad hypotheses related to Jesus are quite compatible with many religions that don't use the word Jesus. That's a long topic. If you guys want to ask more questions about that, I could dig into that more. How do you deal with others who adhere in their God hypotheses and yet completely disagree with you? We talk about it. I'm not going to kill them if that's your question. Can I be free to not associate with God and yet remain not condemned? Absolutely. As such, could it be that many so did and found different ways to godhood, and have found different, overlapping, and sometimes mutually exclusive altruistic existences? Sure. And if so, in what state of agreement, love, mutual blindness, feud, or stubborn resentment do they remain? My opinion on that relates back to what you call the Jesus hypothesis. For me, the Jesus hypothesis, or what I would call Christ, is about overcoming those disagreements, those tensions, those conflicts between our minds and our bodies and our relations and our worlds. That is the atonement of Christ that Jesus and his disciples taught us in the Bible. So overcoming those disagreements is what Christianity should be about, so far as I'm concerned. And if the ascension hypothesis, common in transhuman thinking, is true, and we may evolve to a fully transcended state, how can we be singular when the nature of evolution seems rather to be great diversity? I don't think that we need to be singular in any monolithic, narrow, absolute sense. I think there's a kind of unity that arises from complexity. In fact, I would argue that complexity itself can't develop without a foundation that permits it. The world that we live in now is probably the most complex in the history of humanity, certainly is the most complex in the history of humanity. And the only reason it can exist is because of a great deal of cooperation, more than we've ever had in the history of humanity. So that cooperation, that unity underlies that great complexity and diversity. If I didn't get to your questions well enough, I'd be happy to revisit some of those. Yes, it only functions with competition and democratic freedoms. I agree that those should be part of what I'm talking about. I'm not arguing against them. If I program a sentient being in a simulated reality, am I God? Um, well, there's lots of kinds of gods, and yes, according to one definition of God, sure, you could be God. I don't think all gods are worthy of worship, and by worship I mean emulation, striving to become like them, idealizing them, pursuing those attributes, those virtues in ourselves. The God that I think models emulation in a way, or models virtues in a way that we should emulate, I associate with Christ, but not dogmatically. I'm happy to talk about it in other terms. But that is a God of compassion, a God that doesn't set itself above other gods, a God that would make us all God together. And what does that mean? Well, so it can mean all kinds of things. We have to care about what others desire. We have to care about the rules of other communities, and we have to care about reconciling those desires and those rules to ourselves. That, for me, is what it means to be Christian. If I program let's see, competition, it seems to me far more likely that evolution predates any God than that God predates evolution. Comment. I don't know if there is a first God. I don't know if I can tell you this much: we're not going to become gods unless gods already exist, as I've emphasized in the presentation with you. Could there have been a first God? Very improbably. I don't know. I don't know that anybody can answer that. Perhaps not even the gods could answer that question. Hey, also might I be reinstated as a quantum archaeologist once? Why might I not be resurrected millions of times by many of which might have nefarious plans with my resurrected body? How is this resurrection related to godhood rather than to massive potential predation? That's a great question. One of the areas that I didn't explore a whole lot in my presentation is something I call the benevolence argument. If you go to thenewgodargument.com, you can read more about it there. But basically, I would argue that there are natural moral hurdles to the attainment of increasingly complex and powerful technologies. And so we have good reason to suppose that those who are more advanced technologically than us and have greater technological power than us are more benevolent than us. I think that we're increasingly seeing evidence for this in sociological studies of human history as well, where when we look into the past, we see great violence, we see terrible lives for children, we see things that we now just take for granted around us we couldn't have taken for granted in the past. The world was a much worse place in the past than it is presently, and I expect that that will continue to be the case as we continue to advance. And if we don't advance in our ability to cooperate, I think our civilization will collapse. Let's see. Calling the first cause God is simply growing tired and saying God did it. Yeah, I'm not talking about first causes. I don't concern myself with them. There may be a first cause, there may not. I have no idea. I suspect there might not be one. But where did this God come from when we hear God was not always the ultimate post-human? There must logically be an original reality rather than turtles all the way down. No, not necessarily. Logic does not entail there must be an original or a first. It also doesn't entail that there wasn't an original or first. I simply don't know the answer to that question. In practice, is there any difference in what we do or what is important, whether we are original, becoming of gods, or are new variations of original conditions? Wonderful question, a very practical question. Should we behave any differently if we are the first or if we're not the first? I don't think that we should. I think either way, we should be acting with the benevolence required to increase the complexity and power of our civilization so that we can benefit each other and become those gods that all of human religion for millennia has aspired to through their worship. Now, that being the case, we're not going to do it unless gods already exist. There has to have been a first species. Oops, I'm losing my position. I'm sorry. There has to have been a first species reaching godhood, or your premise is logically faulty. Some species that was not in a simulation. Well, I disagree. That's actually not accurate. There's no reason why there has to be a first. There may have been. And, 1 in a sextillion chance we're that. But again, we're not. Serene, what's wrong with turtles all the way down? It is the simplest model. It might be turtles all the way down. There's also a third possibility. Instead of turtles all the way down, or instead of there being a first turtle, it may be indefinite, in the sense that, and this might sound really strange to you, but it's an idea that I'm exploring and don't have a whole lot of good stuff to say about it at the time, except to say that I'm exploring it. Maybe the search for deeper turtles creates them, in a sense. So I won't say any more about that. I'll start to sound really, really seriously strange. If there is no ground, no turtle gets squished. That's right. No, they collapse into a singularity. You have no causality if there was no such species. It becomes hopefully, you mean hopelessly, I suppose, circular. One eternal round is part of many religions. Many religions have talked about circularity to history, and I don't know that that's not the case. Again, I'm not telling you that is the case, but I'm just saying that we don't have evidence that it shouldn't be the case. When you reach sufficient gravitational mass, quantum turtles, great turtle explanation, Lincoln. Any other questions? All right, Julio, I think I'm finished.
No other questions that I can see. And anyway, it's very easy to reach Lincoln by email. And he always answers email, I guess. Thank you very much, Lincoln. Let's make now room for Brent. I'm going to ask Brent to switch his webcam on. And I'm going to load Brent's presentation. Okay, so Brent goes here, and David, the PowerPoint goes here.
Turning mic on. Test,
So
test,
it's not
test.
a conservative alternative. Is it this one? Let's see.
Can I get someone can hear me? Yes, no?
That's it. Yes, we can.
Okay.
We can hear you very well. You have the floor now. Your presentation is on the screen. And you are also on the screen. Everything is on the screen. So we can give the floor to Brent.
Okay, I'm looking at the podium and I can see a cursor. Can other people see that same cursor?
I don't think the cursor is projected on the main screen.
Okay. Also, this morning, 3 times, I'm not sure if it was my internet provider, but I got disconnected and it took me a minute or two to get back in. So if that happens, it happened during Lincoln's talk, so I'm hoping I have another hour before the next one. But if I disappear, I'll be back in a minute or two, I think. Okay, and then, yeah, basically the presentation today is just the Kaiser.com system that we've been working on and developing for several years. It's an open survey system that amplifies the wisdom of the crowd. And it does this by enabling everyone to communicate concisely and quantitatively. The ultimate goal is to have a rigorous quantitative measure of what everyone believes, including the crowd as a whole or the experts in that crowd and the difference between those two. And a good example of place where people are claiming there's a consensus is within global warming. Lots of people claim there's an expert consensus or scientific consensus that global warming is a problem, but I would definitely like to know quantitatively how much of an expert consensus there is, and especially if I could query, if I could choose the experts, especially transhumanist experts, what do they all think about that? To me, that would be invaluable information as far as my desire to act morally. Because obviously with existential things like global warming, if we get too far away from reality, it could be devastating to everyone, the earth and everything. So things like that are critically important. But one of my personal favorite topics is consciousness itself, that many the things that we've been talking about here, what are we, what is consciousness, what is identity and all that. And as I studied these views, I could see some consensus views that I understood and made sense to me, but it seemed like there was a lot of people critical of those views. And in general, if you talk about consciousness, everyone tends to seem to think that there's no consensus whatsoever on anything. People can't even agree on a definition of what consciousness is. And basically the critical peer-reviewed articles are basically all critical of each other. The goal is to you find someone else's paper and you write a critique and find everything you disagree about in that. But the early results that we've having with this consciousness survey project have dramatic different results than what other people have come up with previous surveys and stuff like that. And it's surprising to me how much consensus is emerging from what we have so far. It's obviously far from a comprehensive survey, but I've been trying my best to capture and get other people in different camps, if there are any significant ones that have a large amount of consensus, to canonize their view. But the one that's emerging, there seems to be lots of experts willing to contribute and join and support and promote that idea versus any other theory that I've seen so far. And it leads me to believe that there's a possibility that within this theory of mind field, there could be more more consensus on a few critically important things than there is actual consensus that people think exists around global warming. But the bottom line is, wouldn't it be great to know definitively so that no one could doubt or disbelieve? And okay, so let's see, I'm going to go on to the next slide here. Okay. I'm not sure, on many of the notes groups, there was a post that last month that was Dawkins, and basically he was being asked, what is the most important question that you would like to see answered? And he replied, and there's the YouTube URL up there, in case anyone wants to go see. That's about a 30-second URL. But basically Dawkins answers the question, how does subjective consciousness works? What is the relationship between what my redness is and the underlying neural correlates? That's basically, he's asking that question. And so there's a survey mechanism tool here, and I would basically I'm going to pull up the Mervetalia question, and I'm going to in my question here. Let's see. Where did my question go? Okay. Oh, basically, yeah, the question's on the slide there. Do you agree? So I had the question right here. Table of contents. Sorry, I seem to have lost the question in my notes. Global warming. Okay. Okay, yeah, so I'll type the question here. So, do you agree with Dawkins? And basically, it's a yes or no question. So, can everyone see that slide? I just submitted that survey question. I'm wondering if anyone can see it. I can't see the results. When I did it previously, it came up and I could see the results, but I'm not seeing that now.
It's right here. It depends on where you click on the screen. I'm going to try to raise it so everybody can see it.
So if everyone can see it, just tell
So
me what the
far,
score is.
have uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 yes, 4 no.
Okay, interesting.
I'm going to raise it a bit.
But yeah, basically the question is, and I'm in that
Mm,
camp that thinks that a lot of people have talked about uploading ourselves, and to me, that's the solution to all of our problems, almost everything from global warming to aging to hunger to our animalistic tendencies to war and all of that kind of stuff. Once we understand the mind and can upload ourselves, then all of those everything from space travel in one fell swoop is solved. And to me, the most important part to getting to that is tying in this relationship between what is consciousness like and what is the subjective feel, what is redness, what is greenness, what is the difference, and how does that relate to underlying objective neural correlates that we know exist in the brain. And so basically that was
I
my...
have to give you an update. Brent is now 6 and 6.
Oh, interesting. There's quite a bit of people that think. So for those people that think there is something else that is more important, I'd be very interested in hearing what that is. So feel free to send me an email because I would like to tally up and see what other people think. And there is a topic on the canonizer.com about what people think is the most question, or what is the most important question, and it would be very interesting to get all of your views canonized, to survey everyone to find out what they think is the most important thing, what questions should we be asking, and what will give us the most bang for the buck to get this millennium or singularity here as soon as possible. So, but anyway, towards that end, I'm going to proceed with that at least there seems to be some amount of consensus out there. Half for consciousness is important and ability to upload, and then there's half, it sounds like, to think there are other particular topics that are important from that. So but basically I wanted to show you that this is basically the slide here is the basic table of contents that canonized with the one person, one vote indicator. So you can see the numbers to the left are indicate how many people. At the top is theories of mind and consciousness. That's the survey topic itself, and there's about 36 people that have participated in this survey. And then the numbers in each of, and below is the title of each of the camps, the various theories that have been canonized. And so you can see at the top level 32 or 33, and then basically if you vote for more than one camp, it allocates your vote accordingly. So when you see fractional numbers, that just means a person may have joined that camp as his third choice or something like that, and then it totals them all up. So at the top you can see, and basically another critical part about building consensus is everyone, when they get together and talk, as soon as they agree on something, they stop talking, and then they find something else to disagree on, no matter how trivial and unimportant it is. And that's where everyone seems to spend all their time, both in the literature and everywhere else. And it becomes an infinite yes no argument that becomes very childish. And so the goal here is instead of just eternal yes no trying to convert everyone, let's just canonize everything and survey everything and find out concisely and quantitatively what everyone does believe. And an important part of building as much consensus as possible is the ability to push those disagreeable things that you find out of the way to lower level camps, so that the more important things can rise to the top and get canonized and say, this is the most important and this is what we all agree on. And so that's what this outline format represents. So at the top level, the most fundamental question about consciousness is it approachable via science? And you can see there that 33 of the 36 people are in that camp, and then you see some onesie-twosie camps below, such as consciousness is of divine origin or unfathomable apart from God. And so clearly that gets that out of the so you establish that right up front, and then immediately under that, with almost as much consensus, is what the experts recently decided to call representational qualia theory. And you can see there are 24 of the 35 people that are supporting in that camp. And basically the representational qualia theory is much like the idea that James Hughes talked about this morning about the self being a narrative fiction. Because basically representational qualia theory is the idea that there's the world around us that is the initial cause of the perception process, and the final result of that perception process is our knowledge of that world, and that knowledge is something in our head. And the strawberry that we're looking at is reflecting 650 nanometer light. That's the initial cause of the perception process, and the final result of the perception process is our knowledge of that initiation of the process, and it's made of the redness. So the redness, or the qualia, or the ineffable phenomenal property, that's a property of our knowledge, a property of something in our head, and that's the general idea. And so basically, if you think about it, then inside of our head there's a model of the world, and at the center of that model of the world is the model of our body, and then inside that skull, inside that knowledge of our skull that has a referent in reality that is our real skull, is the knowledge of ourselves. But unlike all the other knowledge, that knowledge of the self doesn't have a referent in reality. And when you think about what is an illusion, that's basically what it is. An illusion is having knowledge that doesn't accurately represent its referent, or something that doesn't even have a referent. So it becomes an illusion. But still, even if you consider it an illusion, your knowledge of yourself is still very real, and it still exists. And the theory basically predicts that that is what our spirit is that knowledge of ourself that does not have a referent in reality. And that seems to be the emerging scientific consensus, that there's a lot in the theoretical field, there's a lot of experts that agree on that idea. And an additional part of that theory is the idea that the internal knowledge is composed of these phenomenal properties such as redness and greenness. And those are ineffable phenomenal properties. And what ineffable means, it defines in the statement what ineffable means, and that is basically, if you tell someone a particular chemical tastes salty, unless someone knows what the meaning of that abstract word salty is, they can't you can't effectively communicate that. So you first have to be able to experience that, to know what that salty sensation is, to know what someone, and to have that bound to that abstract term salty. Otherwise you can't know what it means. And so when you tell someone that I represent that strawberry with redness, we can't know if someone else may be representing that strawberry with greenness. And then so let's see, I'm going to move to the next slide. So there's the approachable via science, we covered that. Representational qualia theory, that's the general consensus that has almost as much. And then below that we move down in the mind-brain identity theory, and that's the idea that everything we are is our brain. The spirit world and our spirit is dependent on the brain. And right down here is where we finally start to see some significant other camps that are starting to emerge to be close to being competitors. Like there's the high dimensional theories, which includes the Smythe's car hypothesis, which is basically, and if you think of Platonic spiritual dualism, where the spirit is in some neither world or some external world or some other dimension or something like that, all of these levels are compatible with and agree with representational qualia theory. And then there's pan-experientialism and a bunch of others like that. And then when you get down to the next level below that, if we move to the next slide, you can see function. This is where the real horse race, and this is at least so far, the only place where there's any disagreeable consensus. And it's basically all around the idea of how does redness, or the phenomenal properties of the subjective experience, how does that relate to the underlying objective neurons or neural correlates that we know exist there? What's that relationship? And basically there's two horse race camps. There's the functional property dualism, and down here there's material property dualism. So functional property dualism is basically David Chalmers' idea that the relationship is purely functional. If you have the right set of ones and zeros, or if you have the right set of functioning underneath, the qualia or that phenomenal redness or greenness will arise in some hard way. And so the only important thing is the functionality of the underlying computational material. It doesn't matter if it's silicone, it doesn't matter if it's neurons, it doesn't matter if it's beer cans or whatever. Anything that has the proper function, the same experience will arrive from that. But then the competitor to that camp is the material property dualism. That's and that's basically the idea that there must be some substance in the matter, perhaps some chemical substance that actually has a redness property. We oftentimes think of the strawberry as having a redness property. It's similar to that, but instead of the strawberry having the redness property, it's our knowledge, some chemical in our brain or some component, some neuron composed of some material, if it's in the right state, it has a redness property. And without that material, you won't have the qualia. So those are the two at that level. And yeah, and someone mentioned that many of the views are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and that's the goal of this entire system, is to try to find those things that we agree with, the things that are not mutually exclusive, and move them into higher camps so that we can both be in the same super camp and agree on those things that are not mutually exclusive. But where we have differences, push those out of the way so that mutually the things that are not mutually exclusive can exist and show that we all have consensus on them. And now I'm on the computational functionalism camp here. And this is, and you'll notice now below I've also got highlighted the consciousness from detection, reaction, association, and consciousness pertains to organisms interacting with the environment. So basically there's two dimensions that are going on here. One is the idea that qualia is important, or there's no such thing as qualia. There's qualiphiles and qualiphobes. And then the other dimension is, can consciousness be reproduced or entirely reproduced or completely 100% simulated by an abstract computer? And so those are two dimensions of belief there. And so the current consensus is that the qualia is the most important, and that's why that's included in the representational qualia theory. And then the computational theory has been forked here, because if you think of these people in the computational functionalist camp and the people in these other two camps, consciousness from detection, reaction, and association, those are also computational functionalists. But the difference is the computational functionalists underneath representational qualia theory agree that there's qualia and that qualia arise from that functionality. But the people outside of the representational qualia camp are people that believe in everything about consciousness can be simulated, but there is no qualia, or qualia isn't important, and that's the difference of the camp. And if enough consensus around that computational qualia showed up in the survey, they could potentially request to the survey process and say, in other words, let's say Daniel Dennett and and I'm trying to think of some other qualiphobe people, and there's probably a lot of people in this audience that believe computers can be entirely simulate everything about consciousness. Minsky, yeah, someone mentioned Minsky. That's true. He's a good one. If all of those people joined, and if these camps got together to merge and come up with a concise definition of what they all agree on, then those people could propose that there's a consensus that computational functionalism is more important than the qualiphile qualiphobe distinction, and they could request that the whole structure be inverted and that computational functionalism move into the spot where representational qualia, the representational qualia theory. But the bottom idea is you have multiple dimensions here, and whichever one the consensus agrees is most important rises to the top. And if you want to find out how many computational functionalists they are, if they aren't the consensus, then you have to count both the computational functionalist camp up here and the consciousness and all of the other similar camps. And the goal is to, and currently that camp isn't as well developed, obviously, because their views are spread across multiple camps and they all have different names. And to the degree that that exists, the ideas don't become as relevant, and it's basically the idea that in order to get your ideas out, if you agree with anyone, you have to work together to communicate and unify your language and talk about it in a consistent way so the rest of the crowd can understand what it is you're trying to say. And Yeah, so I'm pretty much got down to the consensus cap, covered those, and reviewing my notes here, I think I'm pretty close to the end. So let's see. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had for today, so I'm ready to turn it over for questions.
Yeah, I think I will start. So why don't you do another poll on this?
I'm sorry, what was that? Do
If
another what?
we think, why don't you do another survey like the one you did before to find out how many people in the audience think that speaking of qualia makes any sense and how many don't?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. So basically, do you believe qualia is an important part of consciousness? Does that capture, does that sound like, does anyone propose a better way to phrase that question?
I think I can propose a better because qualia is not defined at this moment. It doesn't make much sense to ask whether something which is not defined is an important part of something which is more or less well defined like consciousness. I would raise the question like, believe it makes any sense to make such a fuss about a qualia.
Okay, do you believe it makes sense? Help me with the rest of it.
It makes sense speaking about qualia. I'm referring to Wittgenstein that you cannot speak about, you should forget.
Okay. Okay, so how about, do you believe it makes sense speaking about qualia when talking about consciousness or how about that? Julio, do you like that version of the question? Someone's asking, is the idea of true qualia bunk? Is that? Oh, okay. Are qualia necessary to understand consciousness? Are qualia necessary to understand consciousness? I really like that version. Anyone object to that? Okay, I'm going to post that in. Oh, wait a minute. Cancel. So let's see. So meeting, tally a question. Okay, so there. Okay, here we go. High results until voting is closed. Okay, so ask everyone. There we go. Yes. And I'm not seeing the results there, so what do I have to do to see the results? Are they up on the wall somewhere? I'm going to try sitting in a chair, see if I can see the results. Oh, there it is. I can see the results. But I can't see the numbers. Numbers. Looks pretty equal to me. If you can perceive the results, there's your qualia evidence. Oh, qualia has achieved a consensus. It's red and green. How great is that? Here is with people in the no camp is a popular camp, but I think there's a bunch of theoretical experts that study and think about this, and their consensus is yes, qualia is important. And I think they have very clear definitions of what qualia is and what ineffable properties are. Let's see, I'm trying to read this stuff as I talk. Let's see, it seems to me that qualia are an attempt to resolve the subjective-objective dichotomy when it seems as if we have no direct access to reality, but only access through the model that is generated by our brains and informed and updated asynchronously by perceptions. Yeah. I guess Julio's having a connection problem. God's punishment for not believing in qualia. But anyway, yeah, and for the qualophobes that believe there are no qualia, I would challenge all of you to read the arguments read the definition of basically in the representational qualia theory camp. They define a phenomenal property, an ineffable phenomenal property, such as redness or greenness. And the reason what it means to be ineffable is it means you don't know how to interpret the 650 nanometer light that's landing on your eye to tell you what the original thing is like, what is phenomenally like. For example, let's say glutamate is what it has that has our redness property in my brain. But yet if you shine light on glutamate, it's going to reflect white light. And so if you interpret glutamate as having a whiteness phenomenal property, that's going to be a misinterpretation of what it is phenomenally like, because that's what my brain uses to represent 650 nanometer light, and I experience that as redness, even though if you shine light on it, it reflects whiteness. And the fact that if we interpret that as whiteness, we're misinterpreting it, and that's called the qualia interpretation problem, and that's what makes ineffable phenomenal properties blind to cause and effect observation. And there are descriptions of how to get around that, what scientists need to do to discover that and reproduce that in other people's minds, in essence effing the ineffable and those kinds of things. So I would challenge you to understand what it is the expert consensus are saying about that, and if you disagree with any of that, then canonize your views and find out how many other people agree with you and why you think it's bunk or why it's not important, and let's measure this going forward, because obviously the camp is predicting that science is about to make one of the greatest discoveries of all time, the relationship between these redness and greenness and the underlying neural correlates that have them. And once they do that, they'll be able to F those phenomenon to other people, and we'll I'll be able to communicate my redness to you, and you'll be able to experience that. And the many possible responses could be, well, yeah, that's the same as my redness, or no, that's my greenness, or wow, I've never experienced that before in my life. And the prediction is that science is about to achieve that ability, and of course that would falsify the people in the no camp that think qualia is not important. Okay, someone said the problem with qualia is the word does not have clear content meaning. And that's what we attempt to do in the representational qualia theory camp. We give it a concise definition of what it is. It's an ineffable phenomenal property like redness or greenness, and it suffers from the qualia interpretation problem. And the only way to communicate them is to find out what it has that has that phenomenal property, whether it's the right function, whether it's the right material, and reproduce that in your mind so that you can experience my redness with your redness and greenness all at the same time, and then you'll be able to say, whoa, yeah, your redness is my greenness, or your redness is something I've never experienced before in my life. Okay, I'm reading the someone asked, does the scope of canonizer contemplate the whole scope of human knowledge? The topic that I have up on the screen there, the scope of that survey topic is consciousness in general, and in specifically, is qualia important? And if qualia is important, what, where, and how is it? That's the focus of that question, but anyone can create any survey topic in Canonizer.com to cover anything they want. the whole scope of human knowledge. You can format survey questions any way you want and develop them, and then just solicit information from people and serve. And anytime you find someone that agrees with you, they can join your camp. If they have a different opinion than you, they can canonize their camp as a competitor to your camp. And the ultimate result is the most important topics will rise to the top. Okay, Julio says, the point is we may be missing some things. Oh yeah, Lincoln is responding to Julio. Exactly, a necessary concept. And Julio says that's exactly why qualia are not a necessary concept. And we must also remember that it is possible that some of us don't really have qualia. And that would certainly explain why some people are in the qualiphobe camp. Everyone that says, no, there isn't really qualia, maybe they don't really have qualia. And that would certainly be consistent with everything we see, right? Maybe they're kind of zombies that have abstract information and they can pick out the red no versus the green yeses. But of course, until we can ineffable and basically connect our minds up and experience what red and greenness is like for other people, we can't yet know. But the scientific consensus is predicting that we are about to achieve the ability to NF those things and know for sure, and know if the qualiphobes don't have qualia or they're just not thinking about it the right way. But the goal is to merge everyone's mind together. And it good conversation here. It says, I am not sure what an emergent model of software would consist of either. How do you model emergent property? Yeah, that's a good question I have. Because David Chalmers admits that if you have any function and redness versus greenness can arrive from the right kind of functionality, what is that functionality and what ties the two together like that? Offense only has qualia among the qualo files. Offense only, I guess I'm not following that. But anyway, yeah, so it looks like we're just rambling on now. So I'll take my seat here. And yeah, so Buddha nature. Qualia is the new Buddha nature. The expert consensus is conforming around, right? It'd be interesting to see what all the Buddhists think. Have a Buddhist canonizer to see what all the Buddhists think. I don't think I'm Buddha, but interesting comment. Okay, so I'll turn my video off here. Turn my mic off.
Thank you very much, Brent. And now is the turn of Dan. Dan Massey, I have managed to retrieve his presentation. I hope it's the correct one. I'd like to ask Dan to come here, also to switch the webcam on. Okay.
I really,
Dan, can you come here where I am?
I can't guarantee that there's one. Uh, I'm sorry.
If you can come
Can you
here
hear
at the
me?
podium. Sure, we can.
Julio,
First,
can you
I'd like
hear
to
me?
ask you if this is your presentation indeed, beginning with joyful
Okay.
immortalities here. Is this
Um,
yours?
did you happen to know?
So if you come here, first you want to, if you're
Yes, this
sitting
is mine. There were two versions
down,
I
you want to
uploaded.
stand up.
Version 2 is the correct one. If you can see the
Okay.
thing, this is probably the one you got.
Okay, so just come here.
Yeah. Stand up. Oops. Sorry, I just lost my video's off, sorry. Trying to get.
Okay, now you're switching video on again, and you should join me here.
Stand up and
You should join
come
me
down.
here at the podium. Unfortunately, for some reason, I see that you are not having a good internet connection, while you usually do have a good connection.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to stand up. There you go. There we go. Now I got control. Do you see a problem with my connection? I can connect on a different connection. If that's a
No, I see that your connection is normally green. I'm seeing it red now, which means that somehow the system believes that your connection is not that good. Okay, anyway, your presentation is on the right screen.
How can I see my own slides?
Okay, so now it is on the right screen. What you want to click the title bar, and then you're ready to go because you can zoom on the screen.
Right. Yeah, this is the right set.
Okay, then you have the floor.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, am I supposed to leave the video off?
No, shoot on. Let's see how it works. Okay, now you're coming. That's it. Oh, it's quite good, but okay, you have the floor then.
Okay. Well, I think that the title is self-explanatory. I'd like to tell you why I believe everything we are talking about and anticipating is in effect here for us to simply claim, but there is some perspective needed on when certain things might be available or possible, and I'll offer an unusual perspective on that, I think. This quotation, you run from everything that you feel, you're so afraid you'll want to be a part of it, is from a song by Adam Lambert, who was a couple of years ago quite well known when he had just won a big TV contest, but it's sort of dropped from the site. But anyway, the concept is really relevant to why I think some of the things I'll be talking about have not achieved much traction so far in human history, and fear really lies at the foot of it. Myself by saying type hello world there. Whoops, there we go. But it gives me, have I changed the slide? There we go. Well, let me say that it's a pleasure to be back after observing this workshop last year. In trying to get ready for this, I went back and listened to all the presentations that were made last year, and I hadn't really, I think, the same perspective back then as I did now after circulating in transhumanist circles for the past year, off and on. I perceive that most people who spoke were talking quite candidly about their beliefs, not necessarily trying to market their beliefs to other people or convince people that they were right, but just simply to lay it out and say, well, this is what I think is important, and just sharing. And so I thought I would approach this the same way. So in a sense, I guess this is what's called consensus in traditional religious circles. You say what's really on your mind, and anybody who can say, well, I think that's a good idea. I think I'll steal that one. Or, God, what an idiot. Anyway, here goes. See if I'm getting the slide change right here. Did that change it? Should that change it? Oh, there we go. Okay, I am immortal. That's a somewhat extraordinary claim, since most of our discussions so far have been about how one might become immortal, lots of technology and so forth. And I'm saying I am now immortal. And let me explain how this can be possible. My consciousness exists in two phases, one of which I'll say is normal consciousness, and one is a kind of super consciousness that guides the consciousness of the lower levels. The lower levels are ephemeral. They're embedded in my meat brain. They have a lifetime as long as my meat brain has. The higher levels are persistent. They exist in a mind structure that is not being computed inside the meat brain, or does not depend on the meat brain, but rather communicates across a kind of interface between decisions I take in the physical mind become a part of a permanent record that gets placed in the persistent higher consciousness. For this to work, there has to be some sort of physical substrate. That physical substrate will be associated with my permanent identity. I have a unique identity. I can't be duplicated, but any physical substrate that happens to be my super consciousness, which is the persistent part of myself, will function for me and enable me to that is physical reality and similar types of reality. I think we just lost a slide there. That gets switched back. There we go. If I can, if I really want to be immortal, I can. I'm sorry, this is someone zapped this and switched it back from I was looking at there, and what I hoped you were looking at. Thank you. Deciding you're going to be immortal is a pretty heavy commitment, because you might imagine that in eternity you might run out of things to do. So just to say I'm immortal means really that I am potentially immortal if I'm willing to stay with the program. But even then, I'm still dependent on some kind of body or straight to provide mind function to my superconscious. And I believe that in time I will achieve the ability to project that for myself, but I'm far from it now. Immortal does not guarantee that one has that property. Well, let's go on to the next slide. Hopefully I can. Oh, that's going the wrong way. What are you trying to do here? I seem to be messed up on being able to get this to go forward to the next slide. It keeps going back to the beginning. And that was the good news I was trying to get to, is to say you are also immortal. Um, and to me, this concept of immortality I'm talking about is a perfectly natural progression of being alive in the universe. It's what happens. It's like oaks grow out of acorns. We are here alive and living on this planet, but we are all potentially immortal if we want to proceed and be immortal. The fact that this body dies and decays, well, so does an acorn, if you'll pardon the crude material metaphor. The issue is, do you want to be persistent in the universe? And the quality of that persistence is not determined by what you believe, like whether you're going to, I believe in Jesus, or I believe in God, or I believe in something else. It doesn't make a bit of difference what you believe. What matters is what you do. And as far as I'm concerned, the concept of salvation is learning what the right action is in any given situation. Once you begin consciousness, and you are gradually become aware of your own potential immortality. And as I'm saying here, some you too, just as I said for myself, would make us the final choice and decide, yeah, I am going to be immortal in the universe. See if I can make this go to the next slide. Well, I can't seem to figure out how to get this to move forward. Julio? Anybody? Well, I suppose I could. Oh, here we go. Finally got there. I thought I'd just take a moment to tell you how I came to view myself this way. And I don't really want this to be a long personal recapitulation, but I basically grew up a rationalist. I have a technological education, degrees in physics and applied mathematics. But when I got into my early 30s, a good time to have a midlife crisis, I started thinking that what I was working with conceptually in terms of my model of the world really wasn't adequate. And I wanted to look around at what other theories and things existed. And I did an awful lot of reading and went through a lot of weird stuff over a period of a year or so. But I fetched up on a document called the Urantia book, which some of you may have heard of. Doubt if anyone has read it. It's 2,100 pages long. And I was attracted to the way the text of the book seems to inform and reshape one's thinking about the nature of reality and the way you interpret what you are actually doing in life and how you think about it. I became deeply involved as an inside activist and participated in the management of a readership organization for over 20 years. trying to develop students a book. But what often happens when you start thinking about the world differently is that you come to the conclusion that perhaps you need to be focusing your efforts in other places. And basically, I became increasingly concerned about how to fix the world. And the longer I thought about it and analyzed it, I came to the conclusion that the real problem was a lack of erotic freedom in the world, that our ignorance and refusal to face the erotic in most human societies and bringing out formal repression of the erotic by religions and so forth was really the important thing that needed to be dealt with. And that sort of will lead me to what I sort of call the capsule meme of what I'm talking about today, which is a particular synthesis of a religious and spiritual viewpoint that gets right down to brass tacks and shows a way to transform the human spirit, which centers around basically the worship of sexual joy and freedom as something worthy of worship. All right, and based on advice coming back on the chat, I'll hit this once and see if it gets any better. Well, I hit it once and it didn't move.
No, then I keep using arrow on the top. You must use the arrow at the bottom of the screen. The one at the top just flashes the screen. Yeah, this one where my cursor is.
Oh, glory! It's
You see, and now
exactly the next correct slide. Oh, and that echoed right back at me too. All right. Somebody's got a microphone on out there. Okay. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think you should understand that the way I view the universe is radically different than the way most of the views that we've talked about in this workshop. Some of basically what is on this slide is just a few high points sucked out of the Urantia book. I guarantee you in 2,100 pages there's an awful lot more than this, and there's an awful lot about this. So anyway, not a critical issue. There are three types of realities in the universe as a whole: absolute, ultimate, and finite. The reality we experience and that we develop in and learn in and evolve in is a finite reality, but its existence is supported by an absolute reality. And the absolute reality is simply existent. It is not something that exists in time or space. It exists outside of time and space and is in effect the source or framework on which finite time and space hang. By saying our universe is finite, we mean it's of a limited size, it's of a limited duration in time, and it's granular. It's made up of little atoms. It is not smooth and continuous like perfect peanut butter. It has 7 dimensions. The dimensions are not described in detail, so we can only speculate about what they might be, even based on the Urantia book. But clearly there is a concept here of a potential multiverse, although it's not spelled out in detail. One of the important things is this whole universe is under construction right now and being populated and organized. It's as though, hey, panspermia got started without us being invited to the show. In fact, we're the sperms that have been panned out into this universe. There are estimates that have been based on stuff in the book that say it's about 80% of building out the full plan is complete, which is to have 7 trillion inhabited planets. but lots more of things floating around in space that wouldn't be inhabited or that would be developable for some other functions. So far, time has run about 40,000 trillion years in this finite universe, and so there's probably another 10,000 trillion to go before we reach a point that we'll talk about soon, a finality. It's important that we have a functioning cosmic government, but against this backdrop of how enormously huge and aged the universe is, it's clear that our planet is not is a relative newcomer to this. Now, the reason we've missed out on all this is because for the last nearly 250,000 years, we've been in isolation from the rest of the universe. About 250,000 years ago, there was a great unpleasantness in this section of the universe, and in the end, they walked away from 37 planets. And they're now just really getting going with pulling things back together. There are events that stand out in history, the stuff mythologized in the Bible, like Adam and Eve, and Abraham and Melchizedek, and Jesus Christ, which have all been part of trying to make things better and crank up the recovery. But for a whole variety of reasons now, it seems that things are really speeding up. Or so I feel, anyway. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all that, but what this leads to is a vision of what individual destiny is. And I don't mean just for myself, I mean for every individual, for all of you guys too. If you will to survive, then you will, and you will join the event called the finality, which is the emergence of a synthesis of all the human experience, of all the people who are going to be all the people who have ever lived, who developed enough superconsciousness and awareness to be able to survive as an ongoing thing in the universe. And the universe is rich and complicated enough that even though it's a finite universe, this will still be a deity. Not exactly at the end of time, but a deity that is the fulfillment of all the possible development within finite time space. And every one of us who survives to that point will become a personality of this supreme being and ready to participate in the next universe age, which is another phase of panspermia, which is more akin to the things we think about in science fiction terms, where we do in fact become the agents of creation over a much larger space of the universe. You remember I said there were only 7 trillion inhabited planets, and even given 50,000 trillion years, you're still only going to have a finite number of surviving personalities to work on this huge adventure of dealing with all the rest of infinite space. But for each of the individuals who participate in this, it centers around your experience of love. And when you have the experience of doing good and making beauty by living truth, that becomes the expression of love. And that expression is what creates the human divinity that is potential in this huge, long adventure I'm describing. And just to try to clarify a little bit, this idea of the Supreme Being that I'm talking about as this deity that develops at the end of time in a sense, although time doesn't end really. It's going to perfect the full expression of every possible value that could be expressed in our universe. And it'll bring all that consciousness together in one group consciousness, which is made of individual personalities of God. And I think you can see that this idea is quite similar to ideas that are expressed by Martine in her Terra Sims uh, vision by saints in the new gods theories they have, and by Frank Tipler in his Omega Point. And although each group focuses on a different way this comes about, and indeed the way this is that I'm describing it, which is largely extrapolated from the Urantia stuff, is again another way it comes about. And you would say, well, this is what I'm describing isn't technological, though. And I will say to you, I consider this all very technological and very rational. It's simply that we're dealing with experiences and forces and behaviors that are not experimentally explorable like in your kitchen or in a simple laboratory. These are things that happen in the mind and in the cooperative mind of humanity. And we don't have any real insight except our own subjective insight into what that means. But in any case, the result of this is a perfect balance of truth, goodness, and beauty in the expression of love throughout the universe. And just so you know that I have a particular meaning of love in mind here, as I'm preaching this little sermon, is that love is the desire to do good to others. You live the truth, you do good, you make beauty, and that's the expression of love. And our desire to do this is expresses what I've called the force of destiny. Now, I know people don't like to think there's a destiny, but as Frank Tipler says, there are some things that must be inevitable, and if something is on the critical path to that inevitability, its probability is unity, no matter how improbable the underlying event may appear to be. Well, all I can say is here that you can think of the Supreme Being as reaching back through time and causing things to happen, or you can think of our anticipation of its emergence as making us make the moral commitments that lead us to make things happen. And now I thought it might be a good time to have a message from our sponsor. This is a little strange, so you'll pardon me. I'm going to read what I imagine a celestial visitor would like to say to this group, were there one here, and were they willing to have me express this for them. Here goes. We welcome you to the fellowship of inhabited worlds, peacefully coexistent throughout future time. Your planet has recently been rescued from a state of near total spiritual and intellectual darkness. We are engaged in the restoration of the services of the cosmic government to your planet. This restoration has been planned for some 2,000 years and is now entering a period of active reformation of your society and its many legacy institutions from the effects of your long period of isolation. We've chosen to address you today because you seek to understand how the power of reason, of a clear-thinking mind, uncorrupted by myths of the ancestors, can and will shape the destiny of your planetary society. We offer to each of you the opportunity to ally within your field of natural expertise and interest with counterparts assigned from the cosmic government staff serving here to address human destiny in these areas. If you will but open your mind and heart to our truth, we will be able to show you the next steps you must take to join in our endeavor to remake the world. There is no ceremony or ritual that enables this to happen. Only your assent within your own mind and your private decisions to act according to the light of truth, to do good and make beauty in your own unique way are necessary to set us on the path of human cosmic collaboration for the future of humanity. So that's what I think they'd like to say to the kind of folks that are here at the Turing Church Workshop. So what do we do about all this? Well, the answer I have always had is performance. of belief. That was someone else's term that came up earlier. Live as if it's real, and you, I believe, will learn that it really is real. I've suggested a framework of things one might keep in mind. Don't fear the unknown, and don't believe a bunch of mythical bullshit people have told you about it. Believe what you learn to be true in your own heart and what is proven true from your own experience. Celebrate all the forms of love, all forms of erotic freedom. Why do I say this? And why do I say this next thing? Worship and learn from the joy of orgasm. Because to me, this is the most fundamental human experience in which the human mind comes face to face with pure, unmitigated joy. And our society seems to insist that for any kind of spiritual development or elevation of the person, one must first turn away from this basic physical empowerment. And it is my belief that this is where the most fundamental correction in our social vision needs to occur. We need to have a religion about sex, and it is a futurist religion. We educate others to overcome their neurotic fears, and in my opinion, we stand ready to serve in a cosmic alliance. Most important, I think, we look for some framework or some set of concepts around which we can have unity, even if we all want to go do it in a different way. So, is this a trans religion for today? It's my start. Proclaim that joyful immortality is here. Understand that's true and make it part of your own experience. And as you practice it, it grows and becomes more complete. Claim your right to have a self-conscious salvation from uncertainty. Claim your right to know that if you have thought sufficiently and deeply about wanting to do the right thing in a situation, that then what you do will be the right thing, and stop worrying about it. Don't be dominated by fear. Worship, the expression of love in all forms, physical, emotional, and spiritual. But emotional and spiritual are not where the conflict is society. It's with the physical, really. And most important, I would say, be open. Explain what you're doing to people. Show people the way by your own example in your own life. And with that, I'll shut up and invite questions. I see there's been a lot of commentary.
You have a question
Well,
from Brent, if you can read it. Just is at the bottom of the text chat.
I have one from Brent, which says, "Can I bring my grandmother back just by hoping for it and not worrying and working on it?" Well, the technology to bring your grandmother back exists. We didn't build it. We don't have to build it. And your grandmother is actually most likely already back. You're just not where she is. That's my personal view of the matter. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with working on other ways to bring grandmother back. But I tend to feel that if you bring back a physical grandmother, that is a flesh and blood grandmother, and you have a grandmother brain, then you go to the problems of how you would recapture what's important in the grandmother brain, and that gets into speculation of time archaeology. Oh wow, yeah, I mean, it would be fantastic to have those powers and do that, and no reason not to pursue it if it seems appealing and important. But I don't think it's necessary to a religious vision of the future. It's just one of many approaches that are part of the idea I was expressing when I said unity, not uniformity. Well, Sarah asks, how do you use this technology? Is it locked away from our conscious use? Because until we evolve enough to use it, there's very likelihood of good outcomes. Totally speculative. I do think we need to change and change a lot to really be gods rather than demons as we become more powerful. Yes, indeed. I wouldn't suggest this is any simple proposition. If one put this into the Urantia framework, there is a tremendous period of time in which one experiences increasingly advanced social structures in the universe until one is qualified to actually execute the functions of a finite deity. I mean, it should be quite obvious that that is not something that just is going to be pulled out of a hat, but is going to be a tremendous amount of work and individual development. And certainly coming from here, all we can be aware of really is our own inner potential. But that has clearly inspired people in many ways at different times. I find it very interesting how it turns up, for instance, in Latter-day Saints theology, that not only that there is this progression, but that this progression can culminate in self-expressed of one's own deity, or divinity rather, not deity. That's one of the more remarkable teachings of Mormon.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. And next is Andrew, but I see that Andrew is not here at the moment, so I'm going to drop his presentation here. But I propose to give the floor to Mike next. I'll just drop Andrew's presentation here.
I'm here, Julio. Julio.
Great. So this is not yours, but this is Andrew's. Yours is it's not this one. It's not this one. Your presentation is this one. So if you can come here and switch your webcam on.
Okay, switch my webcam on like that, huh? Is that what you want?
Right. Yes, that's what I want, and then you should come here at the podium where we are.
Right, let's see. You might have to walk me around again. Let's see.
If
I go up to view. Then what I do? Normal?
It's always easier to have a view normal. Then you stand up and
view normal.
Right. Then you stand up, and in order to stand up, you want to click the last icon at the bottom.
The last icon at the bottom.
Right. You stand up and then you move.
I click to take a seat, you mean?
Using the arrows.
You mean?
No, don't click to take a seat. just walk. Just walk with the forward arrow.
Just the forward arrow. I'm pushing the forward arrow.
Yeah.
Pushing the forward arrow. Result.
Remember that you should click somewhere in the screen first. Otherwise, the screen is not
first.
active.
Okay. Then I go.
So
All right, now I got you.
Okay, now, right. You can,
what if I want to go up? What if I want to click up higher? Can I click up higher? I need to see the whole page.
Right. Okay, so you can hear where I am.
Let me see. Where you are. You're over there, I see.
Yeah.
So I need to get over to the podium?
Yes, just can hear where I am
So
behind the podium.
behind the podium.
Okay.
See here.
It's a bit too far. Now what you want to... Okay, now what you want to do, you see, of the two little screens, your presentation is on the one at the right. So you want to zoom on the little screen at the right.
I'm zooming.
And in order to zoom, you just have to click the title bar.
Whoops.
So you click the title bar on the screen, and you will zoom out, like I'm zooming on it now.
It's turned around, and if I go forward, I can't do. It doesn't do anything.
No, what you want to do, you want to click.
Click on the
here. You see?
thing. Okay. Click on the thing. Okay.
You see where my cursor goes on the top of this little screen, and you zoom on it.
Sorry about the cat.
Yeah, that's the cat wants to participate to discussion too.
I jumped over it. Okay, I'm standing in front.
Okay, now you're standing in front. Click. You see, in front of you there are these two little screens we have seen yesterday.
Yes, I see it.
Right?
I see it. But click.
Your presentation is on the screen on the right.
I see
if
it.
you want to zoom so you can read, you go with the cursor on the top of the screen, the title bar.
Go on top of the screen, like.
Right. Click the title of the screen.
Okay, I got it.
Okay,
now.
you should.
Hooray!
Okay. That's it. And you to advance the slide, use the arrows at the bottom, not on the top.
Yes, I see the bottom. Got you
okay, now. Great.
All right. You want me to
start? Just one moment. I want to say to Andrew, because I see that Andrew is back. Since you are not logged on, I have given the floor to Mike, and you are next. Okay, Mike, you have the floor.
So, all right. Hello, everybody. Glad to
be here. If I can interrupt you again, just one thing. If you could just move your head a bit. Right, now we can see you. Otherwise, you just see the top of your head. Okay.
I'm going to need to wear my glasses because that's a little... Unfortunately, my eyes aren't that great, so I might have to get in a little close to read what's in front of me. I also have a copy of it here, but I want to look like I should look too. All right, let me get started anyway. One of our main themes here of interest is raising the dead, and by scientific means, which obviously is going to be a tall order no matter how you do it. And various proposals are made about it. There's a whole field called cryonics where we are trying to preserve our remains after clinical death in such a way that fairly straightforward technology of the future can get in there and determine our brain structure and do all the fancy things it has to do to resuscitate us, basically. And that's well and good for people that if in fact it actually works, and for those that choose cryonics, it's a good thing, but it won't help a whole lot of other people. And actually, we are interested in all those people as well. which stretches back out, a long ways into Earth's prehistory. And if you want to be benevolent in keeping with religious traditions and such, you really even need to consider other life forms besides human. They lived and died and suffered. And so anyway, uh, the question does come up, really, if you want to do the right thing and you want to have immortality, how on earth are you going to bring back all those people who perished? And as far as we can tell, their remains are lost. They're gone. And in many cases, maybe there's no record at all that they ever lived. Well, we might find DNA fragments if we mine the Earth's crust someday using advanced nanotechnology, and we might actually be able to go a little further than we think in reconstructing a lot of these creatures of the past. But on the face of it, it seems like there's really a fundamental loss of information that occurs. And you talk about quantum archaeology and all this stuff, which is nice if you can make it work, but some of us are kind of skeptical about that. It's like, if I take a bucket of water and freeze it, it turns to ice, and there's a whole lot of structure in there. There's just many, many bits of information in all those ice crystals. But if I melt that ice back to water again, it seems like a really tall order to think that I could recover. I'm not saying all that information is very interesting either, but some information like it would be interesting. But it's a tall order, really, to think about getting back all that structure when you seem to just have nothing. And so what I want to do here is take a kind of pessimistic view about quantum archaeology, about just recovering every little thing that happened in the distant past. And I want to see if there could be some other way that you might still carry out resurrections. As you can see in my notes, I talk about deathism, which I probably can skip over. There's lots of varieties of thinking. People generally seem to be deathists. If you don't believe in a supernatural power, you think that death is inevitable and final, and you might also think that it's a good thing too. So the people that take seriously the idea that there really could be scientific alternatives to deathism are in a minority, but probably a lot of people here, most of us are in this group, maybe all of us are. So anyway, you can go, it's interesting to consider a little bit of historical perspective here. The idea of raising the dead scientifically is not a totally new idea. You can find roots of it going back to the poet named Lucretius, who was an Epicurean philosopher. Maybe people before him were thinking about it too. But Lucretius doesn't really say you can raise the dead. He tries to put down this idea that it's clear that he was a deathist. But what he says actually could be looked at as providing a little crack in the doorway that might lead to such an idea. Lucretius believed that matter was made of atoms, much like the modern view has it. And he thought there were only a finite number of kinds of atoms, which is a lot like our modern view too, with our chemical elements. But he thought the total number of atoms he thought was infinite, which is also like a certain viewpoint today, which you could say that it kind of fits the idea of a multiverse, given that our own universe seems to be finite. And he said, well, considering all the stuff that happens, you kind of expect over periods of time that all finite combinations of atoms should recur over and over, given you have sort of a pigeonhole principle. There's only so many possible finite combinations of a given size, and sooner or later they just keep popping up over and over. And he says, well, copies of us must do that. And he doesn't think that would be a resurrection because each copy doesn't know anything about its other copies. But I would say that if he had thought a little further, he might have had a different perspective, because you could also have near copies that weren't quite the same, but might correspond to something like a copy of you uh, up to the point when you died, let's say, and then something more beyond that. So additional memories, additional awareness. So this augmented copy would say, well, hey, I was dead, but here I am. I mean, I remember I was over here, and I don't remember anything after that. And maybe I just died, but here I am alive again. So, he was sort of pushing toward an idea that of resurrection, really, without doing this quantum archaeology, because after all, these copies just pop up automatically in the course of what happens in the universe. And there wouldn't be any reason that you couldn't have an intelligent civilization that steps in and takes control of this process. But anyway, so I'm just saying this idea of resurrection is an old one, even in the absence of the idea of just being able to recover the hidden past. Well, going on, you get into the Newtonian ideas, where under Newtonian mechanics, Newtonian mechanics applies very well in astronomical observations. You look at the planets and other objects in space and note what their motions are and so on. And from all that, you could predict their positions and movements in the future, or retrodict to the past. So this Russian philosopher named Fyodorov said, well, in the future we should have, more advanced observational apparatus, and we maybe can look at atoms the way we look at planets now, and note their motions and so forth. And they too should be subject to laws of motion. So you could use that to retrodict the past. You could start with the world of today and figure out the atoms pretty much stick around forever. They're not created or destroyed. Uh, at least I think that's what he would have thought. And so you just backtrack and see where they were 1,000 years ago, and you should be able to determine in the finest detail whatever you need, what what the brain structure of somebody was back then, and where those atoms in that brain are now, so you can latch onto those atoms today, again using some advanced technology of the future, and you just position the atoms back the way they were, and you got the person back. You got them resurrected. That seems to be, Fyodorov wasn't real detailed about his ideas, but more or less that's the main idea that I gather from reading about him. That's what he thought. Anyway, we can go on beyond that. We know the universe is not just Newtonian, but the modern view of quantum mechanics and such tells us that there's a kind of fundamental uncertainty about things. And as far as we can tell, the future events are not 100% predictable from the past events. We can't tell which way that photon's going to go. If it hits a half-silvered mirror, it could go through or it could bounce off. And no matter how carefully we measure things beforehand, there's just an unpredictability about it. By the same token, on the face of it, it seems like there's unpredictability going the other direction. When there's just a limit to how much information is really available to us about the past. So people have proposed exotic physics, quantum information retrieval, or quantum archaeology, or something else to work around this problem. And well and good if we can. I'd be happy if that was possible. But once again, I'm going to take the skeptical point of view that maybe that's not going to really be possible, and maybe the hidden past is going to stay hidden, and once the information is obliterated, it's going to stay that way, at least in any straightforward terminology or terms. In other words, I just don't think we're going to have this time telescope that allows us to look back and get all the information we need for resurrections. So you have to ask, what can you do about that? Um, and I've already discussed the main difficulties about it. Another difficulty is a kind of subtle one that says that it might be reasonable to think of the observer as being non-local, because you expect copies of yourself to be distributed around the multiverse if there is a multiverse, and that would further complicate the issue of just what really is your history that you don't know about and can't recover in a straightforward way. So let's go on to the basic assumptions that I would like to make to allow what I call a resurrection. Um, there are just two assumptions that are found in my book Forever for All, by the way. The first one I call unboundedness. Essentially, I'm saying that there's a multiverse, and there's basically an infinite amount of stuff that happens out there altogether. So a lot like Lucretius, really. And of course, we think of our universe as having a finite size, but either there are things beyond that that we can't see, but are still out there. There may be other universes. There actually are many different versions of the multiverse that might be possible, and they're not all mutually exclusive either. One of the important concepts is called the Everett many worlds interpretation or formulation. And in that notion, our reality is constantly splitting into alternate realities. So every time what looks to us like a random event happens, well, it happened like a coin toss or something, or maybe if you want to use a quantum random number generator to really nail it down. Uh, um, it happened one way to us at random, but actually it happened the other way too, or however many other ways there are. Uh, and these branches of reality now go their separate ways. And some people think that's getting preposterous, but at least logically, it seems to explain a lot of things, and uh, it has some support in the scientific community. But that's just one possibility of a multiverse, and it might coexist with other possibilities. Anyway, so we go on. Um, so the first assumption is there's a multiverse, or um, unboundedness, as I call it. There's no limit. One consequence of this unboundedness would be that different versions of history are real. So there's a version of history where, say, Napoleon won the Battle of Waterloo, or say the human race did not evolve, but an intelligent species of birds evolved on the earth, or something like that. So essentially all logically possible finite histories actually happened somewhere. And that turns out to be important for reasons I'll get to shortly. Okay. And the assumption number two is more of a philosophical assumption. It's not an assumption about physical reality, but a way of looking at things that I call interchangeability. And basically, I am in fact saying that I think it's reasonable to think of personal identity as being not localized, but distributed over what I would see as identical copies of ourselves throughout the multiverse. In the multiverse as a whole, we would expect these identical copies to exist. They may not happen very frequently, but they should happen infinitely often. And it's reasonable to think of the observer as being extended instead of just saying, I'm in one of these instantiations. You have no way of knowing which of these versions of reality or settings, whatever you want to call it, you are in. So I say you're not really in just one, but you are distributed over every place that your copies are found, and it's your exact copies. If variations occur, then you could say the equivalence class of your instantiations can split. So there might, if a random looking event happens to you, that should mean that some of these instantiations experience something different. So they're now off of your branch, but there's still infinitely many of them that are on your branch. And all times there would be infinitely many. Okay. Um, so I think I've pretty much gone over, hopefully I've gone over everything I need here. So anyway, well, this way of thinking has some consequences that I would like to just underscore here. It means that I'm saying that at every point in time, uh, you are non-local, and uh, let's say I'm looking at a friend of mine and I'm wondering if that friend ever had a dog. Well, in some of these instantiations, the opposite number of my friend did, and in some he didn't. As long as I don't know the answer, I'm spread out among all of these, and so these different alternatives are equally real to me until I find out the answer, and then the splitting happens. The splitting is very much like Everett Mini Worlds, really. I wonder if it's equivalent to that. I'm not sure. Um, so just to keep this in mind. All right. Oh, what have I done here? I go to the end. I went to the end, doggone it. Hit the wrong button. Takes a moment to fetch everything back. Now you get a sneak preview of everything else I'm going to talk about. Universal resurrection. See, I think that's the one. Resurrection. Now let me see. That's the one that I was trying to go forward from. Well, all right. Now we're ready to look into resurrection, I think. Let me see if I've left out something. I have a very computational view of reality as a whole. I think essentially reality is a quantum computer, a big quantum computer, and which means it's a computer. It works. My background is in classical computing, by the way. I have a degree in computer science, and I'm not knowledgeable about every other thing that's really important, uh, but the way I gather, the way reality looks to me is that it's an ongoing computation, and people are part of that. So they could be called sub-computations. So it, it is reasonable to me to think that to do a resurrection, the biggest problem is that your person, as an ongoing program in some sense, has some kind of finite description, and you have to recover that information. That's the first requirement of resurrection. Once you have it recovered, uh, as I see it, the direction technology is developing in, especially nanotechnology, should allow you in the future to, well, what would you call it? They have things now they call, I don't know, fab labs or something, three-dimensional printers and stuff like that. We're just beginning to develop a kind of a device that you tell it what you want it to make for you and it makes it. And if we imagine that trend continuing in a reasonable way for a period of time, I would say that probably that will be possible at the molecular level. So if you ultimately, if you have a description of a person and you put it into this machine, it should be able to instantiate that person for you. So I hope that position is not too outrageous. And also, I see this as happening by conventional physics means, not something really fancy like quantum archaeology. It would certainly take an extrapolation beyond our capabilities today. But well, I'm a cryonicist, by the way, and we in cryonics are optimistic, at least, about nanotechnology of the future being able to get into our cryopreserved remains and do the necessary work to get us going again. And so this scenario I'm talking about wouldn't be much of a leap beyond that. Um, And I don't want to say that the resurrections must happen uh, by way of somehow programming a protoplasmic brain in a meat body and all that. There might be other ways of doing it, such as uploading into an appropriate computational device or something like that. But the main thing is you got to get the informational base first. Okay. And I hope I'm not speaking too loudly. It says I'm speaking loudly, but anyway, that brings us right up against this problem again. If you can't get back to hidden past, how are you ever going to get the information base in the first place? Okay. So, well, I think I would like to just talk about that in a general way, but I will focus on two people who are my parents that you see here, Neil and Mary Perry. This is their wedding picture that was made in 1946, and they were a young couple about ready to produce some offspring, of which I was one. And well, they lived out their lives, and I spoke to them about cryonics, and I tried to get them interested, but they weren't. So now they're both buried, and we know that there's going to be substantial information loss here. Maybe not total. We have probably can recover their DNA, and I don't know, depending on how they were preserved, maybe there's more than that that's still recoverable. But I suspect that to reasonably resurrect these two people is really going to take a big fill-in of information that we don't have. And so how are we going to do this? Well, considering the ideas that I've been presenting, I will propose the following kind of idea, that we simply fill in. First of all, we do have some information about these people because I remember them, and if we assume that cryonics works for me, or that they can achieve the big breakthroughs against aging, so I don't have to be cryopreserved in the first place, right up here is going to be a significant amount of information about these two. And plus there's records, and there's I managed to get cell samples of them, but you could probably recover some from their burial remains too, and so we'll get some information back. And I propose that to bring about a resurrection of two people, at least, we would just when we've got all the information that survives in the historical record everywhere, which might take who knows how long in the future, centuries, for the nanites to burrow down in the Earth's crust and even go out in space and look there. But eventually we will have arrived at all the information that seems to be recoverable from the historical record. So what we do is we randomly fill out these two people in such a way as to fit the historical information, so it won't contradict anything in history. Now, granted, there are innumerable ways we could do that. And you might be saying, well, you'll get two people that look like your folks, but they're not going to be your real folks. The chance of them being exactly the same as the original people are 0, or 2 to the minus who knows how big a number, or something like that. 1 in Googleplex maybe, or something like that. Well, I would take an issue with that kind of a judgment, because we have already gone through certain ideas, such as interchangeability. And the position I take is that actually my parents were ambiguously defined all along, and from my perspective, because I didn't know where all the bits in their brains were. I knew certain things about them, and what I knew that actually stuck around would still be up here, and other places too. But we would get back a version of my parents, and that version, I claim, should be considered on an equal footing with the other possible versions. So it would be reasonable to call them mom and dad like I once did. And my opposite numbers around the multiverse, when we do this kind of process I'm talking about, we expect that parallel processes will exist in the multiverse. And they will run through all the randomly selected variations of these two folks. And so nobody's going to be left behind, and everybody will get their due. And if I choose to do so, I can learn every bit in their brains this time around and narrow down the possibilities that way. But I don't feel like I'm just getting back. I would just be getting back to people that look like my folks, but they're really not. You know what I mean? Because once again, it was never that total. It was never nailed down absolutely what my folks are. It was nailed down to the extent that I knew things about them, and other people knew things, and they are recorded in records and all that. But beyond that, it wasn't. At least according to the metaphysical views that I take. So that's why I think of this as a legitimate resurrection, even though we haven't used quantum archaeology and recovered every little detail of any version of the past. But well, I'm talking about resurrecting just two people. I think it's good to focus on a few real people, at least as a starting point. Now, of course, I'm not just saying we should resurrect my folks or just a few people, but we want to do a universal resurrection. That is an idea that goes back to this philosopher Fyodorov that I brought up earlier, and he advocated resurrecting all the dead. And he was a Christian. This is a promise that's given in Christianity, that the dead shall be raised. But he said that actually the dead shall be raised, but it would be better if we did it than if it was done for us by some supernatural agent, a god or something. Because really, he said, it's our God-given power to do this. He believed we would be able to do this, and since we would be able to do it, we should do it, and it would unite humanity, bring about a world of peace, love, and goodwill, and create a kind of heaven. And we need to do that. And if we don't do it, he said, we would be really derelict in our duty, our religious duties, and this God might not see that in a favorable light. We might have to answer for that if we don't carry out our responsibilities in this area. Well, you know, I'm not a real believer in the supernatural, but I think that we do have a moral obligation, really, to try to do this if we can. And at minimum, we could create a world of the future that would be much better than this one. It would be heaven, or it would correspond in many ways to religious ideas of heaven. And that, to me, underscores a point that I've seen made before a long time ago, that whatever people want badly enough that's not contrary to physics is going to happen. Okay. So I should be looking at some of these comments too, but see if I can. Somebody's saying something maybe I ought to be. Well, anyway, I'll wait till the questions come along. But we all want there to be a resurrection of the dead. That's a very widespread feeling, and one way or another, I think it can happen. This is just one possibility. Everything I'm saying is my speculation, so don't take me as a dogmatist or anything. There might well be other possibilities, and maybe some of those will turn out to be more tenable in the future, but this is something that I think at least looks feasible to me. So, why should we do this resurrection? Because I've just gone through, I think it's good, and a religious perspective on things, which does not necessarily involve belief in the supernatural, would demand that we do something like this to rescue people from oblivion. Who or what would be resurrected? Well, all people, I think all people who ever lived should be resurrected. And some people bring up the idea of, what? You're telling me Hitler, Stalin, Genghis Khan, you got to be crazy. You don't want those guys around again, do you? Well, I think the bad people are really sick people, not inherently bad people. And so I am a what you could call a universalist or universal salvationist in my leaning. Uh, and I'm in favor of trying to save everybody and cure everybody if they need it and so on. And like I said earlier, well, you got, your dog or your cat. My cat's over here. There's other creatures besides human that are able to feel and suffer, and so we need to give them their due too. And that could take us all the way back to who knows where. I'm not sure what the boundaries of sentience are. Maybe it should include a bunch of computer programs too. We'll have to think about that. But basically, sentient life forms in general should benefit from this. Okay, so how would we go about this? Well, I just sort of sketched out a way of what I would imagine would be done with a couple of people only, but let's just generalize that. Uh, we would uh, we would create something that I will call a resurrection artifact, and it would be essentially an informational database that describes beings that are suitable for instantiation. So it would include the humans of the past, and you then would branch back to non-human creatures and keep going until you've gotten an entire historical timeline on the Earth. Um, and it would um, I talk about a historical timeline. I think the first time we do this will be a special time. That's when, for instance, I would see the people I would be thinking of as my mom and dad. If at that time I'm anything like I am today, anyway. Um, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of, and of course, I'll mention that we have a Society for Universal Immortalism that's sort of based around this whole idea too. And my book, Forever for All, lays out this philosophy. Um, anyway, I would not rule out at all the idea that ultimately we would consider other historical timelines too. Yes. No, Jerry. Not right now. I'm in the middle of a talk right now, so. Okay. Um, we want to think of this resurrection as a labor of love, and we might want to generalize it. We would eventually perhaps do more resurrections under somewhat different conditions, and go on and on. Uh, but at least we definitely want to do the first one. And first things first. And uh, so, you can ask, is this really any kind of a feasible project? Can you do it without, for instance, can you do it without some kind of exotic physics? With just ordinary nanotechnology, the kind of technology that might be instrumental in resuscitating cryonics patients, maybe elaborated a little bit beyond that. Would that be enough? And so, as an interesting little exercise, I wanted to consider the materials requirement of this, what I think would be, how big of a chunk of matter would a resurrection artifact really be? It's got to have enough information to cover the whole prehistory of the Earth. Let's, one thing we would have to consider is how much information is there in the non-human life forms. I'm going to soft pedal that a little bit right now, and I think the main focus initially would be humans, and probably the pets and so forth would take smaller number of bits than humans. We could put those in too, but You know, all the dinosaurs and all that, and all the mosquitoes, all the frogs and all the tadpoles and stuff. We'll leave that maybe for part 2 of our first resurrection project. But anyway, the first part of it would be to estimate basically how many bits does it take to describe a human and how many humans have ever lived. And I will tend to bump the estimate up a little bit here and there too, just to be more conservative. But I come up with 3 estimates of the number. We don't really know what information is significant in humans, and but I will offer 3 possible estimates, and we can see what the consequences would be of assuming one of those, one or another of these. At the low end, it would be something like the genome. Let's say the genome is considered significant, so we want to get that back, plus the memories in the brain. What's a memory in the brain? Well, I'm not a neurologist. I don't know just how, I don't think anybody really knows how memories are stored, but one estimate I've seen is that you can remember about 1 bit per second. Some people think, oh, it's got to be more than that. But remember that your brain also does a lot of data compression and encoding and so forth. So when you remember something, it's sort of generating a world in front of your eyes. But it may not really start with that many bits. If we really assume 1 bit per second, let's say that to be generous, we're going to have a person that lives for 90 years and they never sleep, they just remember stuff all that time. Well, that's about 3 billion seconds, 3 times 10 to the 9th. So now we already, the genome is 6 billion bits, so 6 times 10 to the 9th, plus 3 times 10 to the 9th is 9 times 10 to the 9th. So let's round that up to 10 to the 10th. So our first and low end estimate of the bits in the brain would be 10 to the 10th. Okay. The second estimate, I would start, for the second estimate, which is going to be larger, we'll take an estimate of the number of neurons in the cortex, in the cerebral cortex, which I've seen is 10 to the 11th. And I'll admit that I could be off by a power of 10 here or there, but let's say 10 to the 11th neurons. And how many synapses are there on each neuron? Let's say 10 to the 5th. 100,000 synapses. There's a lot of synapses, maybe not quite that many, but we're being generous here. So that gets us up to 10 to the 16th total synapses in the brain. Let's say it's 100 bits per synapse. So that gets us up to 10 to the 18th. So we've got 10 to the 18th bits for our second estimate. So 10 to the 10th and the 18th. For the third estimate, I'm going to take the number of atoms in the brain and multiply that by 100. Each atom is somehow storing 100 bits by where it's located or something. There's on the order of 10 to the 26th atoms in the brain I've seen somewhere. So we get 10 to the 28th. Okay. Well, to estimate, and then what we then need to do is ask how many humans have ever lived. Looking up on the internet, I came up with 10 to the 11th humans, or 100 billion. So I'll use that estimate. And to make a definite choice, I'm going to use the middle estimate for the number of bits in a person of 10 to the 18th. 10 to the 18th times 10 to the 11th is 10 to the 29th bits. So that should cover the humans who have lived. And let's throw that up. Let's up that by a power of 10, or a factor of 10, excuse me. We'll just call it 10 to the 30th, okay? That could cover pets and a few other things too, but not necessarily every creature that ever lived. Okay, so we've got 10 to the 30th bits in our resurrection artifact. And now what we got to consider is how much matter does it really take to store that many bits? And I'm going to assume, so we've got to have a certain amount of of a matter per bit. And if I read it right on the internet, the genome has pets add 5.6%. Somebody says, well, we're in good shape. So um, so anyway, how much matter per bit? I read on the internet, if I read it right, you've got about 300 atomic mass units or daltons per bit in the genome. And so I'm going to round it up to 1,000. So it's going to take 1,000 bits, 1,000 daltons or atomic mass units per bit. So we're looking at 10 to the 33rd daltons in our resurrection artifact. And well, let's convert that to more normal units. At least I don't really think in terms of daltons when I'm weighing out food on my food scale. But that's not very hard to do, though. There's 6 times 10 to the 23rd daltons per gram. Dividing that into 10 to the 33rd gives you about 2 times 10 to the 9th grams, or 2 billion grams, or 2,000 metric tons. A metric ton is 1,000,000 grams. Okay. And let's assume that our artifact, that the matter in our artifact has a density of 1 gram per cubic centimeter. If it's made of something heavier than water, that would allow some space for access pathways and so forth and so on. Plus, there's that factor of 10 scale up that I put in anyway. All right. Somebody's trying to say this reminds me of assigning a dollar value to an average American. But I do see a difference, because you assign a dollar value to chewing gum, and I don't think of a person's life as just being worth so many tons of chewing gum. But anyway, all right, so we've got 2,000 metric tons, which is 2,000 cubic meters, because that's what the volume of water is. A cubic meter weighs a metric ton. So how much is 2,000 cubic meters? It's really not that much. If I did the math right, it would add up to a cube-shaped building about 41 feet high. So, you know, a modest-sized building in any small town, maybe a small church. Maybe you could even call it a Turing church. But anyway, the materials requirement for the materials requirement for the resurrection artifact, at least on the middle estimate of the bits per person, is not that great. What happens if we go up to that bigger estimate? And that's a factor of 10 to the 10th. And let me see if I can read this right. It works out to the cube would scale up to about 27 kilometers on a side rather than 41 feet. But a modest size asteroid is that big. Okay. There's quite a spread in these estimates, right? And well, that just goes to show you I don't know what the best estimate really is, but you know, somewhere there's not a whole lot more than 1 bit per atom in the brain. I don't think it's really significant. So I think we're up at the upper limit if we say that at most our resurrection artifact would be as big as a small size asteroid out there somewhere, and we could probably snag a few chunks of rock from the Kuiper Belt or someplace like that to build this thing if we had to. Okay, so just on terms of material requirements, it looks like it would be feasible. And the other requirements are more or less what we find by extrapolating with the more prosaic kinds of possibilities in physics, such as nanotechnology. We're not requiring wormholes and faster than light travel and quantum archaeology and a time telescope or something like that. So I see it as relatively feasible, or I see the feasibility being roughly on the order of doing resuscitations from cryonics, or you know, that sort of thing. So it's more believable to me anyway. So that pretty much is my theory of resurrection. And there are a few other points to talk about very briefly um, before I can go to questions and stuff. Uh, um, People say, well, if you're going to get back, going to come back anyway, why bother with cryonics? Uh, that's an interesting subject that would take us somewhat afield to go fully into, but there are some of us that just feel very strongly that we wouldn't want to undergo an unnecessary disability or anything. And we actually are hoping that we aren't going to have to be cryopreserved at all anyway. That would be the best thing of all. So a kind of conservative approach to your future would demand that you just stay in the world as much as you can, and cryonics is a way to do that. But I also see it as a moral, something like a moral imperative. The issue comes up uh, for people that believe in a heavenly afterlife. Uh, uh, they would like to stay in this world to do good as much as possible, and that would be better than just being dead and gone to heaven. And also, I think it's a reasonable speculation that coming back by the non-cryonics route would put you uh, sort of at the bottom of the social scale, because you'd see all these others around you that had gotten a big head start on you in their advancement, and you would be like a little child all over again. You would be a consumer of the benefits, but not a producer, and ultimately the purpose of your life involves becoming a producer, not just a consumer, and taking your place among the elders, as it were, and building heaven and not just benefiting from heaven. So there are a lot of arguments like that that can be invoked, even if you take it as a certainty that, I'm not saying this is a certainty either, but that one way or another you're coming back anyway, so why worry about it? I think a lot of people don't want to worry about it, but it's better to do that. And I will touch on one other subject, which is that I'm really talking about a project that I see happening in a few centuries maybe, although there could be reasons to delay it, uh, such as it, and this assumes that we decide eventually that indeed we can't just get back to hidden past and we can't build our time telescope, but we do have to manage as best we can. Otherwise, you can raise the question of whether there might be ETs out there, extraterrestrial civilizations that have been sitting there for who knows how long, just watching the Earth with their telescopes and watching every move that every creature makes. So they might have vast amounts of our past history that we don't have. I'm sort of doubtful of that, because there's a lot of distance involved in that, and it gets progressively harder and harder to get information on the level you would have to extract it. Um, it is worthwhile to say another thing. In one sense, quantum archaeology would be feasible if you could take a certain process, say it's isolated in space, and you detect every photon that comes from that all the way around it. Then you do have a conservation of information, if I understand it right. And you could reconstruct all the events that took place within this volume of space-time. But you see what the requirements would be for us. There's just no, as far as we know, there's no convenient envelope out there that's surfaced with detectors and is uh, logging every single photon that comes out of our universe. And I think once those photons get away from you, it's going to be pretty hard to run them down. So that's why I don't. That's another reason I don't have much hope for you know recovering the hidden past. Another burning question is, what's going to happen with our universe? Is it going to become unlivable someday, no matter what we do? Of course, you can bet that in the future we will try increasingly to make it livable and affect the course of its whatever whatever it's going to do, we're going to be trying to push it in directions that we want it to go, but we don't know for sure that even our very best efforts will be successful. We might have to face our ultimate crunch and oblivion, except it won't. I conjecture that even that kind of oblivion will not be everlasting, because in the multiverse, hopefully there will be other universes too that are more stable than ours, and some of those will have advanced civilizations that want to carry out a labor of love. This labor of love could involve, I talked about resurrecting more than one timeline, and conceivably we could be resurrecting timelines for those universes that did collapse and destroy their inhabitants, so that their inhabitants can survive after all. Uh, if this happens to us, then we can hope that that the general trend of advancing sentient beings is to get to be more benevolent, more godlike, and so forth, and they would then eventually resurrect us, and so we could take our place alongside of them, and we would perhaps have to develop considerably, but finally we would be essentially equal to them and doing the good work that they're doing. And maybe their universe will go on forever, or maybe we'll be faced with the idea that no universe goes on forever, but there's always some bigger universe that will take in the uh, beings that inhabited the other universes. So that way, as individuals, we would be immortal, even though any one of our of the universes would not last forever. So those are, I call this a zenotic resurrection, when you come back in a world that isn't your own. Earlier, I talked about the idea that the resurrections would produce beings whose memories are consistent with the historical record, but in the extreme case that you came back in another universe, it wouldn't be, because you'd be in a universe that wouldn't be your own, or that's the way it looks anyhow. So those are some possibilities we can raise, but I think it's good at this point to let's see what we have. Is there anything? There's not too much to be said beyond this. There's more than one way to carry out the resurrection of the dead, and if you cannot do quantum archaeology or recovering the hidden past, like with a time telescope, all hope does not vanish, and I think there's a perfectly reasonable alternative to resurrecting the dead that we should be able to do. Meanwhile, I encourage people to try to stick around in this world and get your mind files in place, be a cryonicist or whatever. At least think about those issues. So that pretty much concludes my talk, and I'm ready for any questions. Should I turn on? What should I do now?
Just don't do anything yet. Let's have a look at what questions we have. But first, I want to show how much I liked your talk.
All right. I said something about
I think
deathism early on, and there's a reference. Okay.
any other questions for Mike? Ah, yes. Uh, Brad asked that you indicated that you have cell samples
Okay.
of your
Somebody wants to
how did you get?
know if I've made my cryopreservation arrangements. I sure have. I've had them in place for several decades, and actually, I work at Alcor Foundation, and but that wouldn't necessarily mean that I would sign up, but I am signed up, definitely am. I'm signed up. All right, but about cell samples of my parents, I have some stored at room temperature, but some are in liquid nitrogen. For my mother, it was harder because she died very suddenly, and I was able to get a blood sample, and that was frozen. And then my father was easier. But I found out something about that. At first, when I said I'd like to have a cell sample, my relatives would give me a hard look and say, "Well, I don't know about this." But I would say for genealogical purposes. Now, everybody, they all know that I'm a family genealogist. I don't know if you guys know it, but I'm a very passionate genealogist, and so everybody understands that. Well, I see genealogy as being significant too. Oh yes, and I know the Mormons. This is not the place to go into this, but I've been wanting to contact one of you Mormon folks about that. Anyway, I'll get to you later. But I see that as important because I think we want our historical records to be as complete as possible before we start out on this filling in randomly and all that stuff. Why is it a moral obligation? I would say that, well, look at it this way, David. If my friend was in quicksand, I would save him because I would want him to be alive. And if unfortunately he appears to have drowned already, what am I going to do? I'll try to revive him, get him back, and you know, I extend that to everybody, potentially everybody. So what of other people? Community. Yeah, okay. The community of all sentient life forms is ultimately what our community is going to be. I don't know if you can see my cat here, but he's in it too. Could anyone truly not want to be resurrected? Yeah, I tend to agree that people that would say they don't want it are really, I think, have other problems. That if you could ease those problems, it would give them a different perspective. What religion follows successful universal resurrection? Well, I guess all religions would pretty much unite at that point. We would find work to do, good work to do, but it's beyond our level now to really go into the details. I think it would be more than just playing a harp, though. All right, playing a harp is good, but you know. All right, the religion of heaven. That sounds good enough for me. Well, okay. We don't want to hold up other people who might be giving their talks.
Okay, so the next one is Andrew. Thank you very much, Mike. Andrew, I have your presentation on the screen. I'm now going to put it on, and if you can switch your webcam on in the meantime.
Sure.
Mike, if you just move back,
Can you guys hear me out there? Awesome.
You have the floor, Andrew.
You have the floor, Andrew. You have the floor. All you have the floor. And I switched the thing just by pressing the buttons down here. By pressing the buttons on the podium. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Well, my name's Andrew.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Awesome. Yes, my name is Andrew Warner. My talk today is going to be on a notion called the cybernetic sublime, and on religious studies. When I first heard about this conference, I was interested to see that there wasn't many people within religious studies, and this is something I've noticed for a while when studying transhumanism is very often people within transhumanism will express interest in religion and write on it or have various discussions, but it very rarely goes the opposite direction. There's Robert Gararsi, and I would argue James Hughes is actually a little bit religious studies and the types of analysis he does. So I came to transhumanism through religious studies. So first I'll give a quick background on religious studies. It's a fairly new discipline. It defines itself as the science of religion. And it's basically a interdisciplinary discipline in the sense that it's defined by a central object, the religious, and then you have a variety of perspectives to understand this phenomenon. So you can have anything from neurotheology to anthropology to history to functionalism. I mean, the list goes on and on. But you do have one central methodological parameter, and that is you don't fall into the discourse of the religious object being studied. So in religious studies, you're very careful to make the distinction of what the religion that you're studying believes and what you believe, and not taking their presuppositions as your own, and maintaining a critical eye when approaching a given religion or religious object. So I found this perspective to be very...
recording. If you can also start recording, David, but I see that your internet connection is very poor. Since Frederick has already done some... Stop the recording, please. Okay, I think the recording has been stopped.
So am I good to go? All right. So I found this methodological parameter to be very useful in studying transhumanism because transhumanism, if you look at the classical definition offered by Nick Bostrom in the of transhumanism, it's a double definition from the very beginning. Transhumanism is simultaneously a discourse on the future and these technologies, and the belief that these technologies are fundamentally desirable and the moral imperative to advance these technologies, which, coming from religious studies, is a very interesting phenomenon. This is almost analogous to a Christian saying any belief in Christ or talking about Christ makes one a Christian. In order to engage in the conversation, in some sense, you are a transhumanist. When you recognize the power of these technologies and you join this conversation and you're the remote bit optimistic about our future, you find yourself implicated. This sort of dynamic is exemplified in this most common grammatical construction you'll find, the "we will." So you can say we will in the future have nanotechnology, we'll have mind uploading, but it's ambiguous as to whether this is a descriptor or whether this is actually a command. It can be read both ways. So you can say, we will do this or we will do this. And, I find this phrase we will sort of exemplifies this dynamic. So with religious studies, we're sort of always trying to parse out where the critical engagement comes in as opposed to where you're within the discourse itself or within the religious community. And it's very strange coming from studying other religions to coming to transhumanism. When you're studying Christianity and you're in religious studies, they'll cite the Bible, they'll cite resurrection, and you'll recognize that as a text. Jesus will be resurrected because of, Paul says so. Well, we don't really recognize that as adequate evidence within academia. But what happens when you say the singularity will happen and then they cite 7 MIT studies? It becomes a lot more complicated because you read an MIT study and say, okay, well, that's legitimate. That's a peer-reviewed journal. And so I think this is one of the big reasons that a lot of religious scholars tend to stay away from transhumanism, is it really complicates their sort of basic approach of how we approach religion. Nonetheless, I think we should join this conversation. I'm hoping in this presentation I can show you how this type of analysis can enrich an understanding of how transhumanism really works or is going to work, or how we want it to work. So I'm going to throw out my personal biases out there for a second. I have strong reservations with many of the claims of transhumanism. I'm very worried at times. But we have to be cautiously optimistic. And I actually consider myself a transhuman heretic because I don't think there's actually no way to actually avoid this conversation. If you actually look into these technologies in the future, it's going to happen. So now that I've let my game up, we'll go on. Actually, I'm going to return to this one. All right, so this talk is going to be on Kant and the Kantian sublime. So why Kant? Kant's one of the key Enlightenment thinkers. One of his sort of lesser-known contributions is taking the medieval ontological argument for God and dismantling it. He actually says you can't prove God through reason. God has to be a necessary prerequisite within the moral realm. This could be a whole separate lecture, but for now, let's just say is inaugurated showing that you can't
Okay, now
actually
it's back.
prove God through logic. This is logic. Should I just stick with microphone? My connection's pretty iffy.
Yes, your connection is pretty bad.
Okay, I'm just gonna do a microphone and not do the video. So in his essay, What is Enlightenment? Can you guys all hear me all right? Awesome. So in his essay, What is Enlightenment? It's a call to think freely, and specifically from unreflected religious notions and organized religions. It makes this distinction between natural religion and revealed religion. And revealed religion is the sort of organized, centralized hierarchy church that when most transhumanists think of religion, they're thinking about revealed religion, whereas natural religion is a universal religion that belongs to mankind that is rational. So already here we can start to see some transhumanism coming through. And he really focuses on naturalistic theologies. James Hughes writes a lot about this of, religion doesn't necessarily have to do with the supernatural. It doesn't have to do with the concept of revelation. You can have a theology that's perfectly consistent with science, and there's no contradiction here. Usually, the supernatural is used as a polemical term for many transhumanists that are very concerned about being identified with anything religious or spiritual, which I understand it. I just don't really believe them, frankly. So the Kantian sublime. You have the sublime as the hello, sorry about that. You have the sublime as a subjective state. The sublime isn't in the object, but it arises in the interaction of a subject and a certain type of object. So it's an experience. The object usually has certain qualities of being boundless or formless, and in a very real sense, it can't be objectified. So your classic sublime object would be the bottomless abyss, infinity, God. The sheer immensity of the objects literally devalues our sensory ability to comprehend it. And so it creates this twofold response. Kant calls it an attraction and repulsion, an alternating vibration. The subject loses his sense of self by being overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the sublime, leading to a devaluation of the senses and a corresponding feeling of despair and self-degradation. The object cannot be represented by the imagination. Its very nature resists objectification, and this realization makes one cognizant of the limits inherent in being human. Lack of ability to objectify/conceptualize leads to a corresponding lack in the ability to subjectivize, thus decentering the subject of the sublime experience. There's sort of a crisis that happens when you encounter one of these dark abysses. You sort of have this rush, this out-of-body experience from not being able to objectify what you're seeing. It correspondingly causes lack of sort of to understand yourself, and this lack becomes apparent. But then the second part kicks in. Hold on. All right. I got lost. So this is only one half of the equation. You also have an attraction. Oh, lost? Still hanging in there? All right. You have an attraction that complements the repulsion, creating, as Kant calls it, a pleasure that is only possible through the mediation of a displeasure. This pleasure derives from the realization that reason can conceptualize our imaginative and sensory lack, despite our failure to objectify this formless object of complication. The sublime is the experience of representing that which cannot be represented. It is the self-reflexive realization that what makes us human is reason's ability to understand that which we can't imagine. So, for example, if you're encountering infinity, to use an example here, on one hand, you have this sort of intense feeling, this sort of rush of not really being able to comprehend infinity. But then you say the word infinity. We can rationalize it. We can understand it. We can put it in a word. We can draw a little horizontal 8. And we can use reason to transcend. As Kant says, the sublime is that, the mere capacity of thinking which evidences a faculty of mind transcending every standard of sense. Kant also describes the process of the sublime as a process in which we become conscious of our superiority over nature within, and thus over our nature without us. Sublime also contains this dynamic of confronting boundless nature while simultaneously recognizing our ability to self-reflexively conquer nature through our rational mind. Let's see out here. So one of Kant's central examples for the sublime is God, which is really interesting, actually, because Kant supposedly put God in the critique of practical reason, and the sublime should actually have nothing to do with God. the sublime, strictly speaking, is an aesthetic judgment, as Kant calls it, but he keeps using God as an example. But he qualifies his attribution of God. He says it only becomes God when we have a disposition that is upright and acceptable to God. So the righteous man fears God without being afraid of him, because he regards the case of his wishing to resist God and his commandment as one which need cause him no anxiety. Basically, Kant here is saying God can only be sublime if you recognize yourself in God. You recognize God within yourself. Which, if, again, you guys know your transhumanist theology, I mean, this is basically co-creator theology Kant's espousing here. He's saying that, when we recognize our will as concordant with God's, if we recognize ourselves with God as part of the mutual task, then God is sublime. Yes. So, beyond God being called sublime in Kant, the sublime applies on a much larger. Okay, I see your point with transhumanist theology. I use that as more of a general term for theologians who endorse transhumanism. I think the sublime applies on much more levels, though, in just how Kant describes God. If you look at the entire way the discourse operates, it works on the sublime vibration of attraction and repulsion. If you look at text, a classic singularity is near, such. You'll have a degradation of the human condition usually. Why do we have to experience death? Well, the mind is merely a 3-pound lump of gray matter. We can't remember more than 7 numbers without forgetting them. We live in this decaying system that's just constantly getting older. In addition to this, you have the default apocalypticism of science. Hughes writes on this as well. In these informatic technologies that are going to be developed. So on one hand, you have the degradation of the human condition, and then you have the default apocalypticism of science, entropic heat death, global warming, and then you have nano gray goo, viruses, Terminator scenarios, any of the dangers associated with these technologies that are arising. So this is the sort of repulsion when you look into the abyss, the loss of self, the overwhelmingness. On the other side of that, you have the reason triumphantly asserting its ability to overcome these lacks. Kant's definition of the sublime is the capacity of thinking which evidences a faculty of mind transcending every standard of sense, echoes the transhumanist reification of the mind. It is this pleasure that drives the entire transhumanist discourse. While most accounts of the human condition emphasize our inherent limits, in transhumanism, human nature is redefined as our capability to rationally transcend our material substantiation. When Kurzweil claims the future will hold exquisitely sublime forms of intelligence, he's closer to the truth than he realizes. Of course, this doesn't capture every part of transhumanism, because transhumanism contains many different trajectories, and people who disagree with each other and all that. But this idea of reason surpassing our sort of basic human condition and our mind being able to come above and direct our own evolution and not merely just be subject to the terror that an animal would feel when looking over a deep abyss seems to be a common theme that holds in almost all of the theorists of transhumanism. So what does the sublime give us? Most of us are here are aware of the religious or spiritual qualities of transhumanism, but the sublime actually gives us a typology of what type of religiosity. If you look at transhumanism as religion, it's actually pretty hard to nail down. In one sense, it could be considered mystical, but in another sense, the concern of personal immortality and preserving the individual rather than merging with God seems to run antithetical to that. The sublime is also a really good category because while Kant shows its religious implications, it's not merely religious. It extends to all experience, which of course applies to transhumanism as well. Transhumanist thought makes claims on everything from economics and biology to religion and philosophy and history. Any sort of theory that regulates it to only one of these disciplines will necessarily not be capturing the full phenomenon. And what I like about the Sublime is it captures the scarier part of transhumanism. As I say, it's okay to be optimistic, but there's some serious problems that lie ahead. And if being optimistic comes at the expense of sweeping these problems under the rug, then I'm not too down with the optimism, although I appreciate it. But yeah, the Sublime really captures a different way of looking at it. It preserves these tensions. It preserves this alternate and repulsion, shows how this whole process is working and how the discourse is actually functioning when new people encounter it. And instead of just trying to take it down, I mean, we're basically partaking in a Promethean task here. We're playing with fire. And while it's fun to muse on immortality and such, you know, they're very real consequences. And yeah, this is why I sort of at the beginning stated my personal beliefs when it comes to this. But yeah, I guess by applying the Sublime to transhumanism, we can get a better sense of what's going on with transhumanism and where it could go in the future. I believe that is all for now. Gonna see if we have any. Does anybody have any questions here?
Thank you very much, Andrew. First, I'd like you to, now that I see that your internet connection is working well again, I'll ask you to switch your webcam on again so we can see you. We can take some pictures. And who has questions? Oh, okay, here he is again.
Other scholars, I know Robert Garrard wrote Apocalyptic AI. I believe that came out about 1.5 years ago. A lot of James Hughes' writings I would categorize as religious studies, even though he isn't explicitly in the Nexus. He's very careful to maintain a critical boundary. He had a series of problems with transhumanism, but he also is obviously part of the community engaging with it and is not afraid to jump between Christianity and Buddhism and use concepts from a bunch of different religions to analyze what's going on here. I'm trying to scroll up through these questions. Religious studies scholars can be practitioners, but they have to be very careful about how they bring their religion into their practice. A lot of my professors at school were run-of-the-mill sort of religious types. They had been reading sort of the history, going through the primary document.
Better switch the video off again. I'm afraid that... oh, I think he has dropped off. Okay, anyway, hope that Andrew came back. He was the last speaker. We still have two pre-recorded videos, one from Fred and Linda Chamberlain, and the other from Ben Gurr, but they are on YouTube.
Of course. Yeah,
And we need
theology.
disappeared. Oh, he's back.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Awesome. I don't know where you guys lost me. Earlier, you guys were commenting on theology. Theology is a term we just tend to use for any movement that has sort of a centralized, loose set of beliefs. It has very negative connotations, but actually theology can be quite radical. If you look at the theology of the Christian church, for example, during the medieval ages or late antiquity, everyone was arguing with each other. There was contradictions everywhere. So while it has this notion, of a tradition, of being sort of set in the past and internally consistent and sort of unbending, it's actually a bunch of people disagreeing with each other, butting heads, chopping off their heads. Theology gets much more interesting if you start really going back in history and seeing all these theologians who just hate each other and are ready to kill each other over these disagreements. So I would reject the negative associations with the word theology. But yeah, when I use the word theology when it comes to transhumanism, it's the sort of normative principles, the idea of information underlying everything, the world being substrate independent. A lot of the common things you can get almost every transhumanist to agree to. Do we have other questions here, or is this a wrap? Thank you, guys. And thank you,
Thank
Julio.
you very
Thank
much.
you very much. This was great.
Thank you very much.
This was great. Oop.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. And I think that was it. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. As I was saying before, there are two extra pre-recorded videos, one from Linda Chamberlain and the other one from Van Gertzel, but they are already on YouTube. So I will send you all. Oh my God, this has just finished after 8 hours and someone is coming now. I can't believe that. Okay. Who is recording? Is that you, Frederic? Thank you all for coming, Lincoln, and I look forward to joining the next workshop on transhumanist spirituality that I believe is going to take place in Salt Lake City. But can you say when exactly is the EA workshop? Yeah, the MTA conference, Salt Lake City, and when? In April 1. April 6th. That's a date to remember. Okay, Federica, you can now stop recording and come to the back of the room so we can collect the recorded file. So push again actions, record session, and you can stop.